Hey guys, this is Mitch with Fine Point CGI, and today we're going to kick off a small mini series where I build a very basic multiplayer shooter inside of Godot. So the goals of this little mini series is basically to kind of cap the year off with a small game. And the game's going to be a multiplayer shooter that's going to have a small elo system that's going to keep track of users and their statistics. It's going to go into how to actually build a full shooter controller from scratch. So we're going to have the ability to jump, dash, grapple hook. We're going to have the ability to shoot, of course, pick up weapons, pick up ammunition, pick up health. We're going to have the ability to obviously kill each other. We're going to have a leaderboard, remappable controls, things like that. So it's going to be a really long tutorial, I guess, series of sorts where I'm going to try to do really long form videos to just kind of make a full thing, hopefully before the new year. So in this video, we're basically going to build out the character controller. We're going to have the ability to grapple, jump. We're going to have the ability to shoot, pick up weapons, and pick up ammunition, all within this little bit. We're also going to be able to shoot each other as well. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to plan out kind of what we're thinking at a high level. Now, typically when I do games, I try to do some basic planning of just kind of what I'm thinking, and then I usually build it out from there. So first things first, we're going to have a game manager. So since this is a multiplayer first-person shooter game, that means that we're going to have game modes. We're going to have things like that. So that means we're going to need to have some kind of game manager to keep track of our game state. We're probably also going to have some kind of game state manager, now that I think about it. So I'll add that in real quick. But basically what I'm thinking is we're going to have a game manager that handles most of our stuff. That's going to be a public static object, so that way we can actually get it. So it's going to be a singleton. Outside of that, we're going to have our UI section of our code, which will basically handle all of our UI stuff. And that's where our UI manager kind of comes in. So it's going to handle our UI states. It's going to handle our pause menu. It's going to handle our leaderboards. It'll hold references to those objects. So that way, as we grow this game, we have something that we can universally use as a way to get to our UIs. Now, when it comes to actual gameplay, we have our player here. We may need a gameplay manager, but I guess we do have a game manager, so we probably don't need it, but we'll see. But we will have our player code, and then we'll probably also have to have a scene manager of some description as well. And that will handle any of our scene events or things like that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right here. And then we'll have our game state manager, and that's basically just going to handle all of our game state. Now, all this is basically subject to change as we start building and as we start working, but this is kind of my high level attempt to just kind of say, here's how we're approaching it. In terms of networking, we will need to have a client right here. So we'll have a client like that, and we'll drag that into our game manager like that. So that way we have our client, which is basically like our client code here. And then we'll need some kind of server here. Now, the server code is just going to go exist on its own, just because for right now, I'm not fully sure how we're going to do all of that. I record a lot of these things in steps, so it's possible that we might need to make some changes with how we structure these things. But I'm thinking that our server is going to be relatively simple, but we will see. So now we need to kind of build out our player. So how are we going to actually build out our player? Well, our player is going to be relatively simple. What I'm thinking that we can do is we can come in here and we can basically build out a very simple design here. So our player needs to be able to do a couple of things. They need to be able to sprint. They need to be able to shoot. They are going to need to be able to aim, dash. They might need to die, right? So they need to have a dead state of some description. They'll need to be able to grapple, because I'd love to give ourselves some verticality. I think verticality will sell really well. It'll be a nice feature to have. And I think wall running as well might be very useful. So when we plan this out, we need to plan these 8 different features here. And I think that's primarily all 8, other than maybe take damage. And I think that might be all of them. So it looks like we have about 9 states, which kind of kills me because I wish we had 10, have a nice even number. So we got to have something. I guess idle is another state. So we'll grab that. That way everything kind of works out, because if it's not 10 and it's 9, it's going to kill me. So we'll do that. So when it comes to how these guys are going to work, we need to talk about how we're going to handle our different states. So when you're at idle, where can you go? Well, first you can actually walk, right? Which I actually don't have a walk state. So we'll grab a walk state. Walk/run, right? So we need to be able to walk/run. And so we can transition from our idle state to our walk state, and then we can go from our walk state to our sprint state. I'm assuming that we can be able to jump from any of these 3 states. So we'll add these guys in like so. So that way we know where we can go. I'm going to make it so that way we can shoot when we are idle. Like this is what I'm thinking. And then I'm thinking that we can also shoot while we are walking. I think that that's fair. I don't think we should allow them to shoot while they're sprinting, because to me that doesn't make any sense, or when they're jumping. Or maybe we should allow them to sprint or shoot while they're jumping. I mean, that does kind of make sense. So I think I will allow for that. So we'll go in and drag that guy in. There we go. Now, when can they aim? I assume that they can aim pretty much any time that they want. So they could aim while they're running, jumping, or idle. So we'll basically just make those guys all connect. So run, jump, and idle. And if you're curious, what I'm doing is I'm basically just mapping out what I think how things should work. You can always take damage. So I'm just going to leave that out here. That's just going to be a thing. Dashing should be available at all times, so I'll put that out here. Dead, same thing. Wall run, I think wall run's going to be its own thing, and grapple as well. I think wall run can only happen when you're jumping and you are next to a wall, so I think that that's fair. Grappling should be able to happen anywhere. I think that will work. And I think you can only die if you take damage. So that state has to be reliant on this state. So we'll just drag this guy into here. There we go. And that's what I'm thinking is our little state dependency graph almost. So from here, let's go ahead and actually start building some of this thought into an actual. So let's go to Godot here, and you will see that I already have a scene somewhat set up here. So I have an asset folder, a resource folder, and a singleton folder. Now, this is going to be important because I'm going to talk to you guys about how to organize your stuff. You can see I have assets and I have resources and I have singletons. But you'll also notice that I have a circle right here called cursor, which is spelled wrong. And you'll notice that I have a cursor and an icon. And the reason why is because I'm going to show you guys how I would like to organize this. So asset is where all my assets are located. Resources are where all my resources are located. And singletons are where all my singleton objects are located. Assets will house scripts, and resources will house only object resources. So if you need, for some reason, to have like a inventory or something like that, that's where these resources will be held. So in that case, I'm going to drag cursor up into assets. I'm going to right click, add in a child node. We'll call it textures. We'll just drag these guys into there, and there we go. And that's how we're going to organize our project. And trust me when I say, as your project gets larger, it's going to become more and more complicated to keep everything organized. So it's important that you get these skills at the very beginning of your project. So next, what we'll do is we'll build out a very basic test scene, and it's going to be relatively simple. So I'm going to go into my 3D scene. I'm going to right click, add a child node. We're going to add in a static body 3D. We're going to right click, add a child node. We'll add in a CSG box 3D. We're going to make this about this big, give or take. So something quite small. We'll make it a little larger like this. And then I'm going to right click, add a child node. I'm going to add in a collision shape 3D like so, and I'm going to make that into a box shape. You'll see that it's about this big, give or take. So I'm going to drag this out so that it is the bounds of the object. So we'll make it nice and large like so. Drag this down like that, and then we'll drag this up like that. We'll grab our static body, we'll control duplicate. We're going to pull this over like that. And then we'll bring this over here. And if you're wondering how I'm doing snapping, that is with control. So if you're newer to Godot, just remember that that is how you snap objects. It's really nice when you are making and prototyping levels because you can basically snap pieces together and make them slightly overlap like this to kind of help make them have that consistency that you would need so that way you don't fall through the world. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and build out our player. So we'll come into our node 3D, right click, add a child node. We're going to add in a kinematic, a character body 3D. We're going to name it player like that. We'll right click, add in a child node. Let's add in a collision shape 3D. We'll go ahead and make that into a capsule shape. And that capsule shape is going to give us definition. Now, for right now, capsule shape is what we're going to use. But if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to use a capsule shape, don't worry. We definitely can expand on this and make it better. So right now it's just going to be a capsule shape, but it will be different in the future. So we'll click on our player, right click, add a child node. Let's add in a CSG mesh, and we will add in a mesh, and we will add in a mesh instance. We're going to click on the empty, click on capsule shape, and we'll hit control, drag this guy up, and we'll get our collision shape to match. So let's double check, make sure that it is good. It looks relatively good. If I look at the bottom here, I'll move it up just a tiny bit so that way it's not intersecting with the ground. And I think that with the size of our actual character here, we're going to need to make it so that this character has a bit more space. So let's bring our CSG box out just a bit like this. And let's grab our collision shape. I did not expect it to be as large as it is, but we'll, drag these guys to kind of match. So we'll bring this guy out. We'll grab this guy, do the same here, drag him out, grab these two static bodies like so. We'll pull it out like this. So that way we have some kind of area for us to walk around in. So now we have to add a camera for our player to be able to see. So let's come down to our player, right click, add a child node, and let's add in our camera. So we'll type camera like that. We'll control drag it up until it matches where we would like it to be. In my case, I think somewhere here is okay. So we'll kind of put it at the tip of our little sphere here, and we'll keep that as it is for right now. We'll come in and right click our player, attach a script, and we're going to call it player.gd. Now, the nice thing is if you'll notice, if I detach the script and I reattach a new script, you'll notice that there is a template right here. So you can see that this template should have all of our features that we need to be able to move. So it actually kind of does some of the work for us, which really does help quite a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reattach that player template, and I'm going to come into my assets, right click, create a new folder. I'm going to call it player like that. And I'm going to drag my player.gd in there. I'm going to right click, save this branch as scene, save it as player, and drop it into my player folder. So that way it actually keeps our stuff nice and organized. Now you'll notice here that we have our speed, jump velocity. It already has a gravity setting. It has our physics process. It has our jump and our movement code already kind of built. So that's really nice. So if we hit play and we save this as our test level.tscn, if we hit play and we let this run through, and it looks like our player actually failed because I moved this around. So let's right click our player and remove it from our scene like so. We'll go into our player scene like this just to verify that everything is happy. We'll click on our script, make sure that that's happy. It looks like it is. And then we're just going to re-drag our player in because it looks like we ran into a small bug here with Godot. So we'll drag this guy in. There we go. We're going to rotate it so that way it kind of matches with what we're looking for. We'll hit Control S and then we'll hit play. And you'll see that we have our player. We hit the arrow keys, forward, backward, left, and right. You can see that our player can move. we hit the space bar, you'll notice that our player can jump. Awesome. So now that we have this, let's make it so we can move our camera around. Now, to move our camera around, it's going to be relatively easy. All we have to do is basically keep track of where our mouse is located, and we need to rotate our camera to kind of match. So let's come down here, go into our physics process here. Let's collapse that. We'll come in here and type func_input event. Now, what the input event is for is it's to handle events for your character's movement. So if you're doing something like mouse motion, or if you're doing something like hitting the keyboard, this event here will fire. So you can always use this as a way to kind of control all of your inputs if you don't want to attach it to a physics process. Now, in my case, I'm going to attach most things to a physics process. I just won't attach mouse motion to it because the way Godot kind of works, you can't just pull your mouse motion like that. You need to just use the event system for that. So we'll say if our event is our input event mouse motion like that, then we'll do some stuff. Now, what this is doing is it's basically saying if our event, so if this event here, so whenever we do something, this fires, right? So as long as our event is input event mouse motion, then we can do this code and rotate our camera. Simply enough. So once we know that it's mouse motion, what we can do is we can rotate our character. When you move your mouse left and right like this, you need to be able to move your character left and right. And then if you move your mouse up and down, your character needs to be able to look up and down, right? You don't want to rotate your whole character. You just want to rotate the camera. So what we can do is type rotation.y minus equals event.relative.x divided by 1000. And then we can create some kind of sensitivity parameter. So we'll multiply that by a constant sensitivity. And we're going to make that into a float. So I'll actually come in here, :float, and I'm going to make that a 3. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of fanciness here. So I want to be able to change this in my code. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe we shouldn't do all caps. Maybe we should make it a constant, because if we're going to want to change this, so it might be good for it not to be a constant. So let's do var sensitivity. And what we'll do is we'll hit at export range, and we're going to range it between 0, 10, 0.01 like that. And that's going to allow us to actually adjust our sensitivity in 0.1 increments outside of our script right here. So we'll come in here and type sensitivity like that. And you'll see as soon as I hit save, if I click on my player, you'll see that we have a sensitivity. And if I pull this down, you'll notice that I can increment it by 0.1 of something. You can see I have 2 decimal places here. And that's what this right here tells you, is how many decimal places do you want to allow for? In my case, I did 0.01. So I'm going to redo that right there. I'm going to say by sensitivity. And then I'll come in here and I'm going to actually set up how we're going to rotate our camera. So we'll hit $camera 3D dot rotation dot x minus equals event dot relative dot y divided by 1000. And then we're going to also multiply that by sensitivity. Now, if you want to break this apart into 2 parameters, you're welcome to. You could have X sensitivity and Y sensitivity. I know some people, when they make shooters, they like to make it so that up and down is less sensitive than left and right, or vice versa, up and down is more sensitive. It just kind of depends. So if you want to separate this out, you're more than welcome to. And at this point, this, in theory, should work. So if we hit Control S and we hit play, if my mouse is inside of here, you can see that we can rotate around, which is really cool. But you'll notice that if I come like this, you'll notice suddenly we're upside down. And then if we keep going, we're now right side up. So what's going on with that? And why is it that I can take my mouse and move it outside of my actual game? Well, the reason why we could take our mouse outside of the game is because we're not capturing our mouse. So let's do that real quick. So we'll come up here and say func_ready, and we'll go ahead and capture our mouse. So we'll say input.mouse mode is equal to input, And you'll see that we have a bunch of options. Now, in our case, I'm going to grab captured because captured means it's going to capture our mouse. So if we refresh this, you'll notice now my mouse is captured. So I can actually move my mouse around as expected. If I keep scrolling up, you'll notice that my character flips around like that. See? And it all seems to work pretty well. But we can still flip our character around like they're doing somersaults, right? Which is kind of nauseating, actually. So I'm going to stop. So what do we got to do? Well, we have to stop and clamp that value. So to clamp that value, all we can do is hit $camera.3D, 3D.rotation.x is equal to clamp $camera 3D.rotation.x, comma, and we need to come up with what our max and our minimum pitch is going to be. Now, you could set this as just some random value, and that's more than reasonable. But you should always try to make your stuff scalable and flexible. So I'll come up here, and I'm going to create a variable for that. So I'll say var min pitch is equal to degree to rad, and I'm going to say minus 60. And I'm going to duplicate that and say max pitch like that, and I will make this a 60. So now I'm forcing us to be within those two. So we're going to clamp between minimum and maximum like that. And then we'll also want to keep our yaw rotation, right? So that's our Y rotation within some kind of range. So we'll hit rotation dot Y is equal to F mod rotation dot Y, comma, we're going to do pi multiplied by 2. And now if we hit refresh, this should just work. So you can see if I keep going up, it doesn't allow me to go anywhere. If I go down, you'll see that it doesn't let me look all the way down. Now, of course, you can adjust this to your own requirements, of course. And you'll notice that we can spin around and we can move around like this. And you'll see that everything seems to work quite well. Now the question is, okay, we have our basic movement, which is really great. What do we have to do after this? Well, what we need to do is we need to build out the ability to use WASD, because WASD is your basic movement abilities. It's your basic stuff. So we always should use that. So you can see here we have UI left, right, up, and down. So let's change that. So we'll go to project settings, go into input map, and we'll type strafe left, strafe right, forward, and backwards. For strafe left, we're going to do A. For strafe right, we're going to do D. For forward, we're going to do W. And for backward, we will do S. Like that. We're going to change this to strafe left, strafe right, forward, and backwards. And then we should probably do the same thing for jump. We should probably make a project setting for that. So we'll type jump. We're going to make that into spacebar. And the reason why we're doing all this is because we're going to make a custom input mapper later in this tutorial. So I want to make sure that all of this is set up correctly so that way we can do that later. I'm going to change this to jump like that, and we'll hit Control S. Now, if I hit play, you'll see I can jump, I can run like that, and there we go. Now, this is great, but this is a first-person shooter game. So how do we actually shoot a gun? Now, that's where the fun comes in. We're going to have to build out an entire weapon system into this. So we have a whole mess of things that we need to build here. So what is our first step to building this? Well, all we need to do is we need to create a place to hold our weapons, and then we need to create a weapon. So let's first go to our player. Let's right click on our camera, add a child node, and then let's add in a marker 3D like that. We'll come over here. We're going to hit F to focus in on it. We'll pull this marker somewhere over here. We'll just kind of drag it over. I believe my character is going to be right-handed, so we'll drag him over here like this. Most people are, so it should work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow my character to have some kind of pistol, right? So we'll right-click, add a child node. Let's add in a rigid body, and I'm going to choose a rigid body for a very specific reason. And the reason why is because our character will be able to drop this weapon, and you want it to react with rigid body physics, right? You want it to be able to fall on the ground and get kicked around and stuff like that. So if you want that capability, you have to make it rigid body. But we don't want it to fall out of the player's hands immediately. So let's go into our deactivation, and let's freeze it. So that way it is no longer going anywhere. And now if we right click, add in a child node, let's add in a mesh and let's add in a CSG mesh. Let's go ahead and add in a box mesh and let's go ahead and make it look kind of like a very basic gun. Now, hopefully I will have some additional assets that we can use, but at the time of recording, I don't currently. I have a friend who's helping me, so we'll see how that goes. So I'll kind of make this into something that looks kind of like a gun. So we'll control duplicate this. We'll make it nice and small so we can add in little tiny aiming reticles. So we'll bring that up like this, keep this in the center, duplicate this, drag this guy back like so, duplicate this and drag this guy like this. So now I got a nice little aiming reticle and I have a very basic gun. Granted, my aiming reticles are not quite even. So let's grab both of them and kind of center them like that. There we go. And I think the gun's a little on the large side, but it's fine. So we'll drag this guy forward like so that our rigid body can be directly connected. So if we were to rotate this, we could do something like this if we want to do very basic animations. Now, we may or may not want this in the future, so we'll see how it goes. But for right now, I will put it right there because it should be okay the way it is. Now, for this to work, we need to add collision. So we'll right click, add a child node, and we'll add in a collision shape. We're going to make that into a box shape like so. We'll drag this guy out like so. So that way it's nice and encapsulating into the object. And this is more future proofing than anything. So technically I'm going a little bit off script for where, the tutorial is, but doing this now will save us time in the future. So let's just go ahead and do it so that it matches up nicely. There we go. And then what we can do is we can click on our camera, click on preview, and you can see where our gun is. Now, it's definitely not in a great position, so let's adjust it. So you can see I'm using the position parameter to kind of adjust our weapon in and out for our view. So I'll just kind of drag this guy around, make it so it somewhat lines up to where I would expect. There we go. And that's going to basically be when we hit play, where our weapon will be. So if we go into our node 3D, we hit play, you will see that we now have a gun. Now you can see that our lighting is pretty terrible. So let's come up here, click on this guy, add sun to scene, click on this guy, add environment to scene. And then if we refresh, that will help us get a nice, good environment so we can see what's going on. So you can see we have a gun. Hooray, it seems to be working, right? But how do we actually shoot? So this is where things are going to get fun. So shooting is a whole interaction. It's an entire process that we're going to have to build. So let's go into our player script and let's get the basics of the code in. So first things first, if our player wants to shoot, that means we have to hit input is action pressed shoot, right? But we don't have that capability yet. So let's come up to our project settings. Let's click on add new action. Let's type shoot, click on the plus, click. Like that, and you'll want it to be the left mouse button, no double click. If you X out and you double click, it will say double click. So just be cautious about that. Now, if we hit OK, you will see that we have our left mouse button and our shoot. Now, thankfully, this should be relatively easy. All we have to do is say if input dot is action just pressed shoot like that. Then what are we going to do? Well, let's make a function to handle this, right? So I could write out all my code right here, but it's always good to break your code out into sections. So we're going to try to make this into a somewhat scalable system as we go. So we'll say shoot like that, and we'll come down here and create a function. So we'll say func shoot like that. Now, if our weapon is going to shoot, we need to basically tell our gun to shoot, right? So what that means is that we need to basically say, hey, gun, I'm ready to shoot. So that means we got to get a reference to our rigid body. So I'm going to rename this rigid body as pistol like that. And then I'm going to hit $ pistol dot shoot. And if you're curious what kind of naming convention I'm doing, lowercase means I'm not going to interact with it outside of this class. Uppercase means I'm going to interact with it outside of this class. And that's basically how I do my naming convention because I find it easier. Underscores are great, but if I don't use them, then I know that that's my code versus other people's code versus Godot's code. So it allows me to distinguish between what is mine, what is Godot's, and what is public and private a lot easier. Now I'm going to go into my pistol and I need to create a script. Now in my case, I'm going to name it pistol.gd and I'm going to create a function called shoot like that. And since it's getting called outside of my pistol, from outside my pistol, that is why it's capital. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically say, hey, when you want to shoot, go ahead and instance a bullet and fire it off. But we actually don't have a bullet to fire, right? Because we haven't actually built that bullet. So that means we have to build out a whole bullet. So let's click on the plus icon. Let's go into here and hit 3D scene. Let's go to our 3D scene right here. We're going to right click, change its type. Let's make it an area 3D. Now you might be wondering, okay, why would you make this an area 3D? Well, I want it to have collision and I don't want to move it through physics. So I could do a character body 3D if I wanted to, and that's fine. But I'm using an area 3D just because I figured it would be relatively easier for people to use. So that's the reason why I'm choosing it. Now I'm going to change this to bullet like that. I'm going to right click, add a child node. We're going to add in a mesh instance, and I'm going to make that into a box mesh. Now I'm going to scale this guy down so it's nice and small. So that way we have a small little bullet. Then I'm going to right click, add a child node, add in a collision shape 3D. I'm going to go like this, create a box shape, and I'm going to make that box into the right size for my bullet like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create some bullet code because we want this bullet to be able to get fired, right? We don't want it to just sit there. So let's right click our bullet, attach a script, and let's call it bullet.gd. Now you'll notice that our bullet.gd is right here. So I'm going to hit Control S and save this as bullet. We're going to grab both of these guys. We'll go into our asset, create a folder, and call it bullets like that. We'll drag these two guys in it like so, and there we go. That way things just start maintaining that nice organization. So when we shoot a gun, we basically want it to go forward, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say position is equal to position plus minus global transform dot basis dot z multiplied by speed. You might notice that we don't have a speed parameter, so let's come up here and say at export var speed, and we're going to make that into a type float like that, and we're going to default it to something like 1. And then I'm going to make it get gravity, so I'm going to say position dot y is equal to position dot y plus whatever our gravity value is. Now, if you remember, we have gravity right here in our player, so let's just go ahead and grab that, copy it, bring it to our bullet, paste it, and then we could do gravity multiplied by delta. And if I remember correctly, that's how we handle our player. Let's see. Yes, right here. We do gravity multiplied by delta. So that way our bullet actually goes down as we shoot it. We'll make that a capital G because I think it already has gravity as a parameter, which is interesting. I'm actually going to get rid of that and see if this works because it might just work. So let's try that. And then I'm going to set up a time to live. So when you shoot bullets, they're going to live forever, right? And you don't necessarily want that. You want it so that it dies after a few minutes or a few hours. So I'm going to go var time to live. I'm going to make that into a float. And then what we're going to do is time to live minus equals delta like that. And then we'll say if time to live is less than or equal to 0, then let's go ahead and queue free like that. And that basically just gets rid of our bullet if it goes too far. And I know we've kind of recursed pretty far down from shooting, but we kind of have to for all this to work. So once we have this, let's go back to our pistol. And let's actually get our pistol to shoot. So what we'll do is we'll come up here and we will actually instantiate a bullet. So we'll hit at export var bullet pack scene, and we're going to make that into a packed scene like that. And then we'll come down here and we'll go ahead and instance that. So we'll say var bullet We're going to make that type area 3D, and then we're going to say that's equal to our bullet packed scene. And then we need to add it as a child to our scene. So get tree dot root dot add child, and then we'll pass in our bullet. And then we need to set our global transform somewhere, because right now we're actually adding it to our tree, but we're adding it to 0, 0, right? So if we were to shoot our gun and we look at our scene, we would go to 0, 0. So right here, it would actually spawn right here. And while that's great, that's not really what we want, right? We want it to spawn at the end of our gun right here. So what's the best method to do that? Well, if we go to our player and we head over to our gun here, we should make a small little point here that we instance our bullet from. So let's right click our pistol, add in a child node, and add in a marker 3D. Then we can pull that marker forward like so, and just make it so it spawns directly in front of our player. And we'll call this our bullet spawner like that. We'll go back to our player code right here, and we'll come down to where our pistol code here. And what we'll do is we'll say bullet dot global underscore transform is equal to $ bullet spawner dot global transform. And we should be relatively good to go. So now if we recurse all the way back up to our actual player here, we are telling it to shoot. We are calling out shoot when you hit click. So that should just, in theory, that should just work. So let's try it. So go back to our node 3D. We'll hit play. We'll click, and it crashed. But it was a good crash. It crashed because we do not have our bullet pack scene. So that's totally fine. So let's head back to our player. Click on our pistol. You'll see our pack scene right here is empty. Let's go into our bullet. Let's drag our bullet up and let go like that. We'll hit refresh. And in theory, well, I'm falling through the world. So let's click on node 3D and click refresh. If I click, well, it's not working, I don't think. Or maybe it is. I can't quite tell. So what's going on? Well, let's take a look at our bullet. Our time to live is a float of 0 because we haven't instantiated it. So let's hit equals and let's make our time to live something like 10. That's my fault. So that's the reason why we're having that problem. So let's hit refresh. Let's click. And there you go. Nice. So they live for 10 seconds. So it's not very long, but it's long enough. So awesome. Cool. We got it working. Great. So now the question is, okay, we have a basic game, right? We have the ability to shoot, and that's basically like 99% of making a shooter, right? Well, I mean, not really, right? We need the ability to reload. We need the ability to switch weapons. We need the ability to go ahead and pick up ammunition, right? For us to actually have a full game here. So let's start knocking it out one by one. So first things first, how do we keep track of our ammunition? How do we set up reload, right? Well, all we have to do is let's create a ammo pool. So we'll say var ammo pool. We're going to make that into an int because they're bullets, right? You can't have a half of a bullet. So we'll say an ammo pool. So we have the amount of ammunition our player has. And then we also need to know how much magazine ammo they currently have. So we'll say current ammo. We'll make that into an int. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of extra coding here. I'm going to export this like so. I'm going to do the same thing with this guy right here. That way this stuff is just kind of settled, because then we can actually come in and like make it what we want it to be, right? Especially if you have multiple guns, it's a good idea just to have this. And actually, this is for our bullet, so I'm dumb. So let's hit Control X. Let's go to our pistol, and then let's add that in. There we go. I don't know why I added that into my actual bullet here, but we'll put it into our... Now, once we have this, every time we shoot, let's go ahead and first check if we have enough ammunition. So if ammo pool is greater than 0, then let's go ahead and do all of this. Ammo pool minus equals 1, because we're going to be getting rid of it. And also what I'm going to do is tell it to print out my ammo pool like that. That way I just know how much ammo I actually have. And if I set my ammo pool equal to something like 10, and then I set my current ammo equal to something like 40, I can hit play, and you'll see when I shoot, you'll see I have 3, 2, 1, 0. And now as I shoot, nothing comes out because I need to reload. My gun is now empty, which is awesome. So now, how do we reload? Well, thankfully, we're going to do all of this kind of inside of our pistol code here. So we'll come in here and we'll just say func reload like that. So when you reload, what do? And when you reload, we want to reset it to 10, right? So we need to have some kind of max ammo pool variable here. So we'll say max ammo pool. Now you'll notice that I made it a lowercase. So why did I make it a lowercase and why did I deinitialize it? Well, that's because we want to set that here on ready. Now you might be asking why. Well, this is going to reduce our actual requirements for us to set the stuff up. Because if we say max ammo pool is equal to ammo pool on startup, then that means as soon as the gun gets instantiated, whatever this value is its max value. So you don't have to set it twice. You can only set it once, and it just makes things a lot easier. And same thing here. Let's duplicate this and let's do max current ammo as well. And we'll get rid of this. Like that. Now, of course, if you want this to be different, for instance, if you don't want them to have a full ammo pool of ammunition when they pick up a gun, then of course you can go in and adjust this to be an export. And same thing with this guy, of course. Now, if we come down here in our reload, how are we going to reload? Well, first things first, if our max current ammo is greater than our ammo pool, then we know that we have enough to refill our ammo pool. So current ammo is equal to ammo pool. Ammo pool is equal to 0. And it really feels like I'm spelling ammo wrong, but I don't think I am. AMMO. I think that's right. It just feels wrong. So I guess we'll stick with it. Else we're going to go ahead and say, okay, if our max current ammo is greater than our ammo pool, then if it's not and it's less, then current ammo is equal to max current ammo. Ammo pool minus equals max current ammo. Now you might be asking what this does. Well, basically what it's saying is if our ammo pool, our max current ammo is greater than our ammo pool. So if we have less ammo than what our gun can handle, then go ahead and zero out our full ammo pool and just set it to whatever our ammo pool is, right? Otherwise, if it's not greater than that, then we know that we can just subtract it and we're good to go. This way, we never go into the negatives, because if we were to just do this, there's a possibility that we could get into the negatives. If we do it like this, then it should never happen. It should just be fine. So that should work in theory. So now we actually have to set up our reload. So let's go to our player and let's come to our input section here. And let's just say if input is action pressed, reload, then reload like that. But we don't actually have this action. So let's go to project settings and type reload. And I'm going to make that an R. That's an E, an R. There we go. We'll hit OK. We'll come down here. We'll copy our reload, come down here and say func reload like that. We'll hit $ camera 3D, marker 3D, pistol dot reload like that. And now in theory, if we refresh, which it's going to throw me in space because I'm not on the right scene. So we'll try it again, refresh. If we shoot 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, we can't shoot anymore. If we hit R, it doesn't work. So what's it doing and why didn't it work? Well, first things first, I think this is all correct. So let's throw a breakpoint on reload and let's hit R. Well, it's not calling this code. So that's our first problem. So let's head up here. Let's take a look. So we have reload, which is reload right here. If action just pressed reload, let's go to project settings, reload R. Am I not hitting the right button? No, I'm definitely hitting the right button. So that's not great. If action just pressed, reload. Okay, let's see what our max current ammo is. Our ammo pool is empty. Max current ammo is greater than. If we set our current ammo equal to ammo pool, our ammo pool is 0, but our ammo pool should be 10. Did I set it in my pistol here? No, it's set to 10. Well, it's probably set to 0 because I hit R. Let's take a look at this. Let's throw a couple breakpoints here. Let's refresh, which it's going to throw me into a random scene, but that's fine. 4, 3, 2, 1. R. Reload. 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 So our ammo pool is 0. Our max current ammo is 40. I actually think this is wrong. I think what I have to do is I need to say max ammo pool here, and that will fix that. So let's refresh. Let's try that again. We'll shoot all of our bullets, hit R, reload, reload. Actually, I think this has to be like this. My apologies. I'm doing a little bit of this on the fly. So we'll hit R, reload, reload. Current ammo is equal to max current ammo. Max current ammo is 40. I don't think that this is going to work right here because that would give me unlimited ammunition, wouldn't it? I still can't shoot, so it didn't obviously work very well. Let's take a look at this code right here. So ammo pool minus equals max current ammo. Current ammo is equal to, oh, I think I need to, hold on a minute. So I think this needs to be current ammo. Max current ammo. Let's try this. Current ammo is equal to ammo pool. Ammo pool is equal to 0. Current ammo is equal to max current ammo. Ammo pool minus current. Okay, I think that might work. Let's try that. Let's refresh this. Well, now we have 10s across the board. So that's not quite what I'm, well, actually, that would make sense because this is looking for ammo pool, not current ammo. Let's copy this, paste, paste. I think I made a mistake up here. It's not supposed to be ammo pool. It's supposed to be current ammo. So let's try this. Let's see if this works. Shoot, 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 shoot. Well, I have 40 of them. So that's not what I wanted because I'm probably going to have to flip it. So 9876543. And now we're out. So that makes sense because current ammo is set to 40. Ammo pool is set to 30. There we go. Now, if we refresh this, we can shoot 10, reload, shoot 10, reload, shoot 10, reload, shoot 10, and then we can continue to shoot forever. So that means that this part here is broken. If we hit refresh, our ammo pool is at minus 160. That's because this is our max ammo pool. So we need to set this to ammo pool like that. So now this should, in theory, work. So we'll do this. We'll shoot some more. R. We'll shoot some more. R. Shoot some more. R. And we are officially out of ammunition. So we should be showing 0. And there we go. So now if we hit this guy, hit R, we should be out of ammunition in our current ammo and in our ammo pool. So there we go. I just had some of my variables messed up. That was my fault. So at least we got it working now. So now let's get some juicy feedback, right? So something that I don't talk about in my tutorials very often, which I should really just make a tutorial on it, is what's called juicy feedback. And that's where something happens to make your experience better, right? So for instance, when you shoot a gun and it recoils back, right? That's considered juicy feedback. That's giving you feedback that something happened, right? So let's go ahead and add that. So let's right click on our pistol, add a child node, add in an animation player. Let's drag that underneath our pistol, and then let's go ahead and add in a new animation. Let's call it shoot, like that. And what we'll do is we'll click on our pistol, we'll click on transform, we'll go ahead and grab our position, create a Bezier curve. Let's go back, go forward to 1. Let's come in here and let's just drag this guy back a tiny bit, throw a breakpoint, and then there we go. So you'll see, bang, it shoots. Now we're going to want to pull this up so it's a bit quicker, something like that. And then we'll want to reset it. So let's give it a slight reset here. So when a person shoots, it does that. And that's quick and it's a snappy motion. And I think that's going to work out. Now we're going to want to do a cubic fall off here. That's going to help make it feel a little bit better. See, it kind of smoothed out the edges of that shot and smoothed it out so that it doesn't quite, so it's not as harsh, if that makes sense. So I'm going to drag this back like this, and then I will click to have it play, to have it repeat for us. So bang, there we go. And I think that will work if we look at our camera. Yeah, I think that'll work. And if we want to, we can also give it a tiny bit of rotation as well to help go with that. So a lot of times you don't just want something to do one action, you want to do multiple actions. So we'll add in another one. We'll go back here like this. We'll pull this as a rotation, wrong direction. We'll rotate it on the X axis like this, just a tiny bit, like 9 degrees, I want to say. We'll snap it like this, and then we'll come up here and hit Control D to revert it. So bang, and there we go. So that's basically how a shot actually works, kind of like in real life. Bang, right? So it's interesting that I could do a ping pong. We'll get rid of that. So you'll see bang. There we go. So now we just have to play that animation. So let's go to our script. We'll come into our shoot. We'll hit $animation player dot play, and we'll pass in our shoot animation. So now if we go into our scene, we hit play, you can see when we shoot, our gun goes back. Now, interestingly enough, if you shoot fast, you'll notice that our bullets go out, but they don't quite stick with our gun. And I think that that works because if you look, if I double click really fast, see how it shoots it up? And I think that that's fair because it's going to force the user to kind of keep temperament with their shooting. And I think that that's going to work pretty well. If you don't want to do that, then don't rotate the whole object, just rotate the actual mesh itself. So that way it doesn't do the bullet spawner. But I think that this works, so I'm okay with that. Also, I must have duplicated my pistol, so we'll delete that second node, which is probably why we are running into double bullets being shot. So if I refresh this, that probably will solve that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that should work. So now that we have that little bit of juicy feedback, that's going to give our player a bit better feeling when it comes to that gun. Now at this point, we got to talk about how to switch guns. So how do you actually handle that? Well, thankfully that should be relatively easy. We already have a pistol, right? So we can just make something like a battle rifle, right? Like an assault rifle. So how do we actually make an assault rifle? Well, if we duplicate our pistol and we just call it assault rifle, like that, we can disconnect our script, right click, attach a new script, and let's attach a GD script for assault rifle. Now, the thing is this pistol, this assault rifle here, is going to look exactly like our pistol, right? You look at it, you hide one, you hide the other, they look exactly the same. So what if we make them look a little bit different? So let's just come in here, adjust this a little bit, maybe pull this guy, make him a little smaller like this. Maybe I think we can come like this. Let's bring this a little bit smaller, control duplicate it. Let's pull this guy out like this. Let's duplicate it, make it more assault rifle-y. Like I said, this will probably get switched over to an actual asset later, but for right now, we'll make it a little bit more boxy, a little bit more assault rifle-y looking and feeling. And with assault rifles, they tend to have smaller sights, or at least in this case, I'm going to make it a smaller sight. So we'll go ahead and make it just a tiny bit smaller like that. Select this one. I'll get rid of it. I'm going to grab this front sight. We'll pull this guy down like so. I'll make like a grip almost for this. We'll duplicate it. Get a bit smaller. This for like a little point for the bullet to come out of. And then I'm going to adjust where the bullet spawner is. I'll pull this guy up like that. Now I'm going to grab these little aiming pieces right here. I'll duplicate it, pull it across, and then duplicate it and pull it to the front like that. So that way we have two different weapons that just look slightly different. That way we have something, right? We'll grab our collision shape. We'll just kind of drag this to match. There we go. And that should about do it. And then for our animation, instead of doing a shoot animation like we were doing, which in our case, since it's connected to our pistol, it's running the other animation. So we'll just go ahead and trash that animation like that. We'll grab our assault rifle, we'll add a track. We'll come over here, we'll click on our transform. We'll put a breakpoint right here or a little keyframe like that. We'll do Bezier curves. We'll pull this to 3.4. We'll pull this forward one tick. We'll make it come back. And we will put a point right there. We'll go like this and we'll reset to that as well. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to adjust the rotation ever so slightly because with assault rifles, they really don't bounce very much. So we'll do that. Put a guy like that. There we go. And we'll reset this to 0. There we go. And then we'll come up here. There we go. So if we hit repeat, I think that works. Unless we want our gun to stay like this while it's shooting, which is possible. I think we could adjust this just one tick forward, maybe. I don't know if that's going to make it feel better or worse, but we'll try it. Yeah, I don't think I like that either. Let me snap all of these guys back just a tiny bit. There, now I think that's going to make it even. So now I should be able to do this. I think that'll work. It's not perfect, but it'll work for what we're trying to do. So we might adjust it later, but for right now, I think that will work for what we're trying to do. We're going to keep it to be the same shoot. So that way we have that. So if we were to hit play on our node 3D with our assault rifle, you can see we click, he shoots. Except for it's consistently playing because I have my, if I go to my player, I have my animation player. This is set to that. So I'll refresh that. There we go. There we go. Not too bad. Awesome. So now that we have an assault rifle, let's go ahead and actually talk about code reusability. So this guy is using assaultrifle.gd. This guy is using pistol.gd. Now you'll notice that if we take a look at our assaultrifle.gd script right here, so it looks like I somehow overwrote my assault pistols animation. So let's go ahead and break that link. So sometimes Godot does this to try to save on resources, but a lot of times it causes a lot of problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that link by coming up here, by basically just removing my animation player, right clicking, adding a new child node. Let's re-add an animation player. We'll hit new, we'll type shoot. I believe that's what we called it for our assault rifle. If we head back to our assault rifle, you can see it says shoot. We have a shoot right here. We'll head back to our player right here. We'll switch our perspective. Let's show our pistol, hide our assault rifle. So we'll come in here. We'll select our pistol. We'll hit a keyframe on here. We'll hit a keyframe on our rotation. We'll bring this guy forward, basically 0.1. We'll move this gun backwards just slightly like that. Create a breakpoint, keyframe, and then we'll pull this guy back something like 5. We'll make another one. We'll go forward by another 0.1. We'll hit Control Shift select all of these guys like that. Control D to duplicate them like that. And that'll basically solve that problem. But now if we show our assault rifle and we hit play, you'll notice that we'll be able to shoot, right? Which is kind of weird. So what's going on here? Well, our pistol, even though it's hidden, is still working. It's still active. It's still able to shoot. So we need to make that disabled. So what we could do is come in here and say, if our current ammunition is 0 and visible is like that, then that's going to allow us to have that thing solved. So you can see if I click, which is perfect. So now we got to code our actual assault rifle. Now, what we could do is we could come in here and we could copy all this code and basically paste it into our assault rifle and then go from there. But it's always good to create code that is reusable. Reusable code is always important. So what we'll do, come up to file, we'll hit new script. We're going to create a new GD script and we're going to hit call it gun like that. We're going to make it extend from rigid body 3D, and that's because our assault rifle and our pistol both are rigid body objects. So we want to make it extend from the same exact thing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a class name for this. So I'm going to say class underscore name gun. And then I'm going to grab all of this guy here. And then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to go into my pistol and I'm going to control X to cut it. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to go into my pistol. I'm going to grab this section, control X. I'm going to go into my gun. I'm going to paste it. And then we need to pull back our actual variables. So I'll grab my pistol, come up here, control X, bullet, gun, will come up here, paste, enter, control X, control S to save, and it should just be like this. And now all we have to do is come into our pistol and then extend our gun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some adjustments here before we even get into that. So first things first, our pistol. So that's fine for right now, but I'm going to right click up here in my assets. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it, I'm going to drag my gun.gd into my guns folder. I'm also going to grab my assault rifle and my pistol. I'm going to drag it into my guns folder. And that's going to give me a little bit better organization of my project. So once we have this, we can actually just extend. So if we look at our pistol code right here, we can hit extend rigid body 3D. We could just drag gun right up here. And there you go. It's going to extend from our gun. Or in theory, because we did a named class, we could just type gun and it will extend from there. And that's because we did a class name. So now I can hit Control S. I can go here into my assault rifle and do the same thing. Gun, like that. And the coolest part about all of this is I can just type super and that will execute my super class. And you can see I can do the same thing here. So super, like that. You can see it says, hey, I don't have enough arguments. That's because we have to pass in delta and it will just work. Now we can do the same thing for our pistol. Like that. And that basically handles our need to be able to shoot our guns. So you can see if I hit Control S, I'm good. So I can come in here, I can show my pistol, I can come into my play, hit play. And if I click, you'll see it says, hey, I can't call instantiate on a null value. That's because my bullet got disconnected because we had to do some switching around. So you can see our bullet pack scene is not there anymore. So what I can do is come in here, re-add that. So we'll re-add that. We'll come into the assault rifle, do the exact same thing. We'll hit Control S, go back to our node 3D, hit play. And there you go. And then if I hide and show my assault rifle, it does nothing. So that's not great, but let's see what's going on. So when we shoot, our gun here should shoot. So let's see. If we click, it's running shoot, visible. We go to self, we take a look at it, make sure that it's visible first things foremost. First things first, let's just make sure it's visible. So we scroll down here. Visible is not true, which doesn't make sense because it actually is visible. I'm not sure what's going on with that. So if we look at our remote right now, it is visible. Our current ammo is 10, so it should shoot, but it's not. So my guesstimate is that for some reason, Godot thinks that the gun's not visible, even though it is. It'd be really nice to have hover over so then I can actually see what it's doing. But it looks like it just fails out. Yeah, it looks like it just fails out on us. So that means our logic here for visible is probably not going to work because for some reason the gun thinks it's not visible. So what that means is that we're going to need to create a variable that basically says if this gun is active or not. I was hoping I could avoid that, but it looks like we're not going to be able to. So what we'll do is we'll come in here and say var active is equal to false, and we'll export that out. So that way we have a usable variable here. So at export like that. And then we'll just come into our player, click on our assault rifle, scroll up, active, and we'll make it active. And then we can go into our gun and make sure that we change this from visible to active. So now in theory, this should just work. Interesting. So it's not working. Active is not set to true. Now that is absolutely wild because I set it to true here. It's visible, it's active. Okay, so I see what's going on. So what I'm doing is I'm shooting right here on my marker 3D. So it's firing on my pistol. It's not firing on my rifle. So that's my fault. So what we need to do is we need to come in and actually change this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my marker 3D. I'm going to rename this. So I'm going to go into my player, marker 3D. I'm going to call this gun holder, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually basically right click and attach a script. And I'm going to call this gun holder, or perhaps we could call it weapon holder if we want to have different types of weapons. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called shoot. And I'll make it a capital S because I know I'm going to be causing it to shoot. I'm also going to come in here and I'm going to get an array of weapons. So we'll say var weapons, and we're going to make that into a type array, like so. We're going to also come in here and say var weapon index. We're going to make that into an int, like that. And then I'm just going to go weapons, bracket, bracket, weapon index. Dot shoot, and I believe that it's a capital S, so we'll double check with gun shoot. Yep. So then we'll just pass it in like that, and that'll tell the weapon that's in this weapon index to shoot. Now we don't actually have any weapons, so let's create a function to kind of pull back our weapons real quick. So we'll come down here and go func get weapons, and we'll say var rigid body children is equal to bracket bracket for I in range bracket get child count, like that, and that's going to pull back our children. We'll say var child is equal to get child I, because that's going to pull back our children, and we're going to have our index right here. So we're going to get that specific child right here, and then we're going to come in and say if child dot is class quote, and we can choose a class. Now if we want to, we could just say gun, and that will work. And we'll hit colon, and we'll come in and say rigid body children dot append child, like that, and then we'll return rigid body children, which since we're going with gun instead of rigid body, originally I was going to go with rigid body, we'll just say gun instead. So we'll say gun children, and then I'm just going to go ahead and change those over so that way it just kind of makes sense. Now if we want to type this return, we can actually type this as an array. And I believe we can actually do array of type gun as well, and that should just work. So now whenever we want, we can basically get the weapons that are underneath our actual gun holder here. So if you have 2 weapons or 5 weapons or 10 weapons, you can go ahead and just do it right there. So now all we have to do is come in under our ready and say weapons dot equals get weapons, like that, and that'll pull back our weapons. And now, in theory, all we have to do is basically just say, hey, this weapon is our active weapon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to default this to 2 real quick so I can demonstrate this, and then we'll talk about switching weapons in a second. So we'll do weapon index of 2. We'll come in here, we'll hit play, and it's broken. So it says trying to return type array. So we'll have to come in and just change this as just an array. So that way it is more generic. That way we don't have that error. We'll refresh it. You'll see if I click shoot, you'll notice that it's going to crap out on us. It's going to say, hey, attempted to call function shoot in null instance. That's because our marker 3D actually is now called weapon. If I remember correctly, if we go back to our player, it's called gun holder. So we'll grab that gun holder. We'll grab this guy, gun holder, like that. And now if we refresh, we can click and it's going to go and say out of bounds index array 2. That's because this is supposed to be a 1, because arrays go from 0 to its value. So basically, if you have 2 elements in an array, that means that the index for that second array element is 1 because it starts from 0. So now if we refresh this, in theory, out of bounds index of 1, that's because our array came back with 0. So it looks like is class gun doesn't work. So we'll go with the original plan of rigid body, which is probably why I came up with that originally. So we'll do that rigid body 3D, and then we'll go ahead and refresh it. And you can see that our gun shoots. And there we go. Now we can hit R to try to reload, and it's going to go ahead and fail, right? Because it says non-existent reload on marker 3D. So that means that we have to do the same thing that we did for our shoot right here. So we'll create a reload. So we'll just come in here, paste, and then type reload, and then copy it and reload. And now when we hit Control S, we refresh, we can shoot like so. You'll see that we have 0 R, and now we can reload and shoot again. Awesome. So once we have that, we actually are pretty much good to go with our weapon dynamics. Now all we have to do is get it so that we can switch weapons. And that'll be pretty easy. All we have to do is come in and basically switch our index. So if we go into our gun holder here, whenever we want to switch weapons, we're going to create a function to just handle that. So we'll say func change weapons. We'll say if weapons dot size is greater than or equal to 1, then we're going to return our weapons bracket weapon index. And that basically is just a check. So if we have less than one weapon, or if we have one weapon, then there's no reason for us to try to change our weapon, right? Because it doesn't really help anything. If we only have one, we can just return the one that we have. And if we don't have one, then we can just return nothing, and that will work. And now we just need to hide our weapon and then show our other weapon. So we'll say weapons bracket weapon index dot hide. And of course, if you want to play an animation, right here is where you would do it. So we'll do that. Dot. So you can do that. If we want, we can now set our item as not active. I believe we actually have active right here. It's a lowercase a. Since I'm setting it outside of this script here, I'm going to make it a capital A. So we'll need to make a quick adjustment to our code. So I believe we have a self.active right there. So we'll change that out. We'll come down to our gun holder here. So .active is equal to false. If weapon index is equal to 1, then go ahead and set our weapon equal to 0. Now this value here is important. Depending on how many weapons that your character is allowed to have, you actually need to set this appropriately. So if you were to have like, I want to allow them to have 100 weapons, right? This is where you would change that. So you could say 100, right? In my case, I only want to carry 2. I'm only going to allow you to carry a big weapon and like a pistol of some description. Else, I'm going to go ahead and say weapon index plus equals 1. Then we're going to go ahead and show that item, and then we're going to go ahead and make it active. So we'll come in here, paste index.show, and then active is true. So now it is an active weapon. There we go. Then we'll go ahead and return that weapon back to our player. We'll make that a capital W. That's an S. Capital W. There we go. And now, basically, we need to set up a way for the user to switch their weapon. Now, in my case, I'm going to hit the number 1. So we'll go back to our player. We'll come up here, and we'll say if input.isAction pressed, just pressed, change weapon, colon, then change. And of course, there's no function and there's no action for that. So I'm going to go to project settings. I'm going to add a new action, change weapon. I'm going to set that to a 1, and we're good to go. Then I'm going to come down here, func, change weapon, and we'll say $ camera 3D gun holder dot change weapon, like that. Now, the reason why I'm returning the weapon, because you'd think, okay, hold on, Mitch, you're returning the weapon, but you're really not using it here. And you're correct. But there are some cases in which we may want to be able to do that. And since we also have it so that way we are returning our weapon, if we wanted to, we could hold on to that weapon in our memory. So we could actually hold on to that for the player themselves, providing that that's something that we want to do. So that's up to you guys if you want to hold on to that weapon. I'm going to not do it right now, but we might do it in the future. So now, in theory, if I hit play and I hit 1, non-existent function change weapon on marker 3D gunholder.gd, Let's take a look at our gun holder. It's change weapons, not weapon. So that's my fault. So let's try that one more time. Hit 1, and you can see we switch between our weapons. Easy enough. Awesome. And you can see if you look at our ammunition, 9876, 9876, 543, 543. So both weapons are holding onto their own ammunition pools, and both weapons have their ammunition separated so that our weapons don't share ammunition, if that makes sense. So now we have a very basic weapon system already built. So now the question is, what do we want to do next? Well, what I'm thinking is we'll go ahead and set up a very basic interface system so that way we can actually see our bullets, because right now we can only just see them in debugging mode, and I think that it's a good idea, of course, for our player to be able to see that. So let's go ahead and go to our player real quick and come up here. Let's right click, add a child node. Let's add in a control node like so. We'll go into our 2D view here. We'll go ahead and maximize this to be full screen. So full screen. We're going to right click, add another child node, and let's add in first a texture rect. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to go ahead and center align this guy, and I'm going to go and grab a texture and drop my cursor right on it. That way, I actually have a small cursor that we can use for our little shooter here. So make this nice and small, or at least as small as we can. Hopefully it'll let us. There we go. And then I will recenter align this. That way we now have a little cursor at the center of our screen. We'll have to do a little bit of playing around, but I think that that should work pretty well. It's a little bit off. We might need to pull it up a tiny bit. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we'll pull this guy up just a touch. There we go. And that'll give us a little bit more space. Now, if we hit refresh and we click, you'll notice that we don't shoot until we switch weapons. See that? That's because I made a mistake. If we take a look, we actually don't set our default weapon anywhere inside of here. So by default, when our game starts, Godot doesn't know that we have a weapon that is our default index. So we need to actually set a default index to be ready and moving. So let's go into our gun holder here, and let's basically fire off a change weapon on start. So that way it automatically starts us off with a weapon. Now I understand that's going to make us go to our index of 1. So what I'm going to do, no, that should just work actually, because I'm looking at this. Once again, I don't think it's being activated or something. So let me take a look. It's not set to active, so that's my fault. It looks like that might be a bug I might have to look at. But that's okay. For right now, I think that that's acceptable. And there we go. Okay. So that should help solve that problem. So now at this point, all we have to do, if I make pistol my first gun in the index, I think that will be fine. We'll set that guy to active. We'll shut off our assault rifle right there. And at this point, I think our next big step is to do our UI. So we'll come in here, right click, add a child node. We're going to add in a panel object, and I'm going to snap this guy to the bottom right hand corner of the screen. And then we're going to drag this guy over like so to be, I don't know, about this big, give or take. It just kind of depends on how we want it to look. So I'll just kind of drag this guy on. We're going to right click, add another child node. We're going to add in a rich text label. I'm going to set it to 10 so I can take a look at the sizing here. You can see the sizing's not quite what I'm looking for. I want it to be quite large because rich text labels tend to make things a little on the small side. So let's go ahead and turn on BB code. Let's bracket right to right align it. And then we're going to go ahead and bracket, I believe it's a B to bold it. And then we'll come down here to the theme overrides. We'll come into font size. We're going to change the bold font to something larger, like a 30, I would say. And then we'll duplicate our rich text label. We'll drag this guy over like so. And we're going to right align it. So instead, or left align it, I guess it would be. And then we'll also duplicate this one more time, and we're going to put a little slash right here as well, and we'll center align it like that. And then we can kind of put this guy like that. And there we go. Now it's up to you if you want to do it this way or if you want to do it other ways. You know, you could just do one rich text label and then kind of build it. And that might actually be a better way. So let's try doing that before I commit to one decision here. So let's make this big like this. Let's center align it like that. And then do out of 10. And I think that that's reasonable. So we'll do ammo count like that. I'm going to right click my control node. I'm going to rename it and I'm going to name it as UI manager like that. We'll double click our panel and call it our ammo panel. We'll right click our UI manager. We're going to attach a script and make it UI manager. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a function to update our ammo count. And I'm going to capital U so that way I know that it's being used outside of my function. I'm going to put in a value for our ammo count. So I'll say current ammo, and I'm going to make that into an integer. And then I'm going to do current ammo pool, and I will also make that an integer. Now all I got to do is hit $ ammo count dot text is equal to current ammo count plus quote slash space space plus current ammo pool, and I'm going to wrap this in str. And what that's going to do is it's going to cast it as a string, and it's basically saying, hey, this is a string, Godot, so please treat it as if it's a string. Because if you just do it as an integer, you cannot add strings to integers. Godot will get upset with you and it'll throw a fit. So you need to make sure that you set it like this. Now, you may or may not want to go this route. Right now, this will be fine, but in the future, this might be a scalability issue, depending on how you have your stuff set up. So just keep that in mind. We might want to break this out to have like a little ammo panel script right here, but for right now, this should be totally fine. Now, we're going to need to come up with a way to universally get our UI manager, and that is where a game manager comes in. Game manager's job is to basically manage every aspect of your game and to make it just work together. So think of it kind of like the intermediary between everything. So how do you create a game manager? Well, that's actually really simple. If we create a file, new script, and call it gamemanager.gd, and we make it extend a node. Then all we have to do is go into our project settings, auto load, click on this little guy right here, click on our game manager and hit open, and then click add. And you can see now we have our game manager. Now, in theory, we may want to put that in our singletons section. So let's drop that into that and let's double check to make sure that our project settings picked that up, which it did. So that's good. And then all we have to do is say var UI manager, and we're going to make that a type control. Like that. Now, if you want to, you could actually come into your UI manager and make that into a class underscore name UI manager like that. And then you can come into game manager and change this to a UI manager class like that. And that'll give you a little bit more flexibility and some type safety as well. And now all you have to do is say game manager.UI manager. And we're going to make that equal to self. So that now our game manager exists and holds on to our little UI manager. Now it looks like it's a little upset because we have a class name that's the same as our actual UI manager. So we'll just say UI manager instance like that. And then we can come in here and change this to UI manager instance like that. That way we have something a little bit more easier to understand. And now anytime we want to get a hold of our UI manager, all we have to do is call game manager.UI manager instance, and it will come up with that instance of this object. And now the nice thing about that is when we shoot our gun, we can now keep track of our ammunition directly inside of here. So how do we do that? Well, all we have to do is go into our gun.gd, go into our process and say, if I am active, then game manager dot UI manager instance dot, and I think we called it update ammo count. Now it's going to ask us to pass in an integer. If I remember correctly, it needed to be a current ammo count and current ammo pool. So we'll pass in our current ammo and ammo pool like that. And now, in theory, if we come in here and we hit play, you'll see that we have 10 and 40. If we shoot, which it's not allowing us, so let me switch weapons. There we go. 9, 6, 7, 5, 4, 3, hit reload, 10 and 30. You can see that you are actually, when you reload, it subtracts an entire pool's worth instead of just the difference. And the reason why that is because the game is punishing you for dropping your magazines on the floor. I'm basically treating the gun as if that when you reload, you are losing that extra ammunition. And that's intentional for this tutorial, but if you don't want to do it that way, of course you don't have to. Now, you'll notice that our stuff right here is 10/20, but everything seems wrong, right? It's not bold, it's not centered, it's not giant like we expected. That's because when we are setting our stuff in our UI manager, we're not actually setting the BB code correctly. So let's do this, bracket, and then let's make sure we pull that proper BB code right here. So we'll just grab these guys, we'll paste them in, space, save, and then let's try that again. So if we refresh, there we go. Now we have our nice little BB code. Awesome. So now the next question is, okay, so we got our basic little UI manager, basic little UI stuff. How do we actually sprint? Now, sprinting is going to be a very important part of the game, right? So the big important interactions that your character can do is sprinting, jumping, grappling, wall running. And for right now, I think that's going to be it. Although, who knows? Maybe I'll make some adjustments later. So how do we actually sprint? Well, all we have to do is go over to our player code here and basically just increase our speed if we're holding the sprint key. So what that means is if we come up here to where we have our input section here, let's just come in here and say if input.isAction pressed quote sprint, which we don't have set up just yet, but that's okay. So if action is press sprint, then we're going to go ahead and increase our player's speed. So you can see here, we have a velocity direction speed right here. So what we can do is come up here, copy, paste, and we can change this to sprint speed like that. And for our sprint speed, let's make it something simple. Let's go ahead and make it, and then we'll come down here and we'll basically just say if action is press sprint, then let's set our speed. Now, since speed is a constant, we can't just set our speed equal to something, right? Because it's a constant. So we need to come up with a way to set our actual speed. So we'll come up here and we'll make a var for that. We'll say var speed and we'll make that into a type float like that. And that's going to give us the ability to kind of adjust our speed as we go. So if you wanted to do like a lerp between two values, let's say, like if you're sprinting and you wanted to say slowly get up to sprint speed or something like that, you could do that here. So if you come down here, you could just say speed is equal to else speed is equal to like that. And then we can come in here and change this to speed. And we'll copy this guy, paste, and paste. And there we go. And then we just basically have to tell this that when we press this action that we actually can sprint. So we come up to our project settings, come into input map, let's type, and let's make it shift like that and hit OK. And now we can hit play, hit shift, and now we're sprinting, let off shift, and we are no longer sprinting. And there we go. Simple enough. Now, something that we should do is when you're sprinting, in a lot of games, you can't shoot. Now, of course, it's up to you guys if you guys want to be able to shoot. But what we can do is we can just say if speed is not equal, then go ahead and allow them to shoot. That way, you could basically make it so that now if you walk, you can shoot. See, so we can shoot, but if you sprint, you cannot shoot. You can see I'm clicking it and it's not letting me shoot. But as soon as I let off sprint, I can shoot. Now, if you don't want that capability, that's totally fine. Just go ahead and comment this out or get rid of it, and that will work totally fine. Now, the question is, okay, can the player sprint forever? And the answer is typically no, right? So what we want to do is we want to make it so that our player can only sprint for a specific amount of time. So let's come up here and actually create a variable for that. So we'll come in here and we'll say at export var sprint time. We're going to make that into a float like that. We'll make that equal to 5. So we're going to give them 5 seconds of sprint time. And then we're also going to do a non-exported variable called sprint time reset. Make that a lowercase s, and we'll just make that into a float. And then on ready, just like everything else, we'll do sprint time reset is equal to sprint time, like that. And then all we have to do is basically, if we're sprinting, so if we're running, we're going to go ahead and reduce our sprint timer. So all we have to do is come in here and say, if we are sprinting, then sprint time minus equals delta. If our sprint time is less than or equal to 0, then let's go ahead and set our speed equal to speed, like that. And now if we refresh, you'll see if we sprint, it should get us back down to regular sprint speed. You can see how we're no longer sprinting. That's because we ran out of stamina. And also you'll notice that we can no longer sprint at all. And that's because our sprint isn't actually coming back. So what we can do is we can say if sprint time is less than sprint time reset, then go ahead and say sprint time plus equals delta multiplied by 2. So we're going to make it basically half of the time of their sprint time. So think of it kind of like this. You can regain sprint double the amount of time that your character can sprint. So if you were to say that the player can sprint for 5 seconds, then it's going to take 3 seconds or 2.5 seconds or so to fully regen all of your sprint speed. However, if you set it to 10, then it would take 5 seconds to fully recover your bar. And you can change that just by changing this 2 to something like a 3 or a 5 or something like that. But right now, I'm going to go with a 2. So now the best way to show this off is to actually create something in our UI manager to kind of handle that. So let's go with func update sprint bar, and we're going to pass in a value of. And then we're going to go over to our player. We're going to add in a bar for that. So add in a child node. Let's add in a progress bar like that. We'll come in here and we'll snap this to the bottom right-hand corner. We're going to pull this guy up like that, and we'll make it nice and small. Something like that. And we'll call this our sprint bar. Like that. We'll click on our UI manager, $, sprint bar, like that, dot, and I believe they had on here, it's going to be the value. So dot value is equal to sprint time. And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to comma and pass in that sprint time reset. So I'll come in and hit $, sprint bar dot max value is equal to sprint time reset. So we'll just pass that in like that. And we're going to make these into, I believe these have to be floats. So we'll go ahead and do colon float, and then we'll do colon float like that. And now we can basically say when the player is sprinting, let's go ahead and update that information. So UI game manager dot UI manager instance dot update. I believe it's update sprint bar. I would forget my head if it wasn't attached to me. So we'll just do that. Comma, sprint time reset, like that. And in theory, that should work. Now, I don't like the idea of all of this being right here. So what I'm going to do is I might take all of this and abstract it into just handle sprint. So I'll just grab all of this, Control X, handle sprint, and then I'll just come down here and make a function for it like that. Because that's going to help handle a lot of our stuff. And we'll pass in delta like that. We'll come up here to where we do handle sprint and we'll pass in delta as well. There we go. And that'll basically just give us a little bit more clean code because this is going to get really messy if we're not cautious. So go ahead and hit play. You'll see if I hit shift, our sprint bar goes down. If we let off, you can see it rejuvenates like that. And there we go. Awesome. So that's pretty much how we can make a sprint bar and a sprint system inside of our little shooter game. So now let's go ahead and create a basic grapple system. So first things first, when we want to do our grapple system, what we'll do is we'll come in here and we'll create a function that basically handles our grappling. So I'm going to create a function, right? So I'm going to call a function here called handle grapple, bracket, bracket. I'm going to pass in nothing, I think. I'm thinking about how we're going to approach this because first things that I'm thinking about is when we do our handle grapple, we're going to need to pass in the direction that the player is moving, right? Because we kind of want to override that direction almost. So I'm thinking that we're going to come in here and say handle grapple. We're going to pass in our direction like that. And then we'll make a function down here called handle grapple. We'll pass in a direction. That's going to be a vector 3. And we're going to make it return basically a direction. So we're going to say vector 3 like that. And then we're going to have to kind of handle our grapple. So first things first, if our input is pressed, grapple, then we can go ahead and grapple. Now, obviously, we're going to need to come in here, project settings, and add in a grapple capability. So we'll add that to our input map, and we're going to make that the Q button in my case. You guys can, of course, use whatever button you would like. Now, when you press this button, that means that your character is going to basically shoot out a raycast, and they're going to say, if whatever I'm hitting hits, then I can grapple onto that. So if I bring up draw IO right here, let's kind of break down this grapple system. Dashing is one thing. Running and sprinting is another thing, which, by the way, I completely spaced on dashing. That's going to be a whole nother thing we have to build. But with grappling, how we're going to do it is we're going to raycast out. Then we're basically going to come in and then we're going to say, if hit object, actually, I think I should use hit object, then if the object is grappleable. So raycast out, hit object, if it's in grappleable group. So if in grappleable group, then we'll kind of come in and move or move direction towards grapple hit point. And I think that will basically be what we're going to do because that's relatively how it should work. Now, there's probably going to need to be a lot more in here because if it doesn't hit an object, it's just going to return, right? So if we just do an end here, we can basically pull that real quick. So grab a little end block right here. We'll just drag hit object. No. If it's not in the grapple group, we're going to end. And then we're going to set our direction towards our grapple. What I'm thinking is what happens if we want to be able to strafe left and right. I think once we hit an object, we should start moving towards that object, but we're not going to want to basically allow them to constantly change their direction after they've done that shot, right? So what I'm thinking that we can do is basically check in the beginning if our button is still pressed. So if button just pressed, then do this. And actually I should probably grab this guy, make it into a diamond, right? Because it's a if statement, right? So the diamonds usually mean if statements. So if grapple just pressed, do this. Else, I think If not, then what it should do is it should check if our grapple is still pressed. So we can come in here. So if we just pressed it, it hooks that grapple, right? And then it sets our move direction, right? Here, if our button is pressed, then move the player towards that grapple position. And then I think we should allow them to strafe left and right. So I think we can get left, right, input, and then just modify our direction based off of our camera position normalized. So that way, based off of where we're looking, we can kind of move left and right and stuff like that. And I think that that's going to give us a really fun interaction. So we'll put that guy over here like this. So basically, that's, I think, how we're going to approach it. Granted, this is me just kind of pseudo coding it out, but that's kind of how I think we're going to look at this, is we're going to build it like that. So if we go back to our project here, if our action is pressed grapple, then then we need to raycast. And the easiest way to raycast, if we go into our player, we go into our camera, let's right click, add a child node, let's add a raycast 3D, and we'll call this grapple raycast like that. And then we can go ahead and make it as big or as small as we want, but I'm going to rotate this guy 90 degrees and I'm going to make it something like crazy, like probably 30 meters or 20 meters. So that means that our grappling hook is going to be about 20 meters in length. And that's a relatively far distance. You can see right there. Now, of course, you can make it as small or as long as you want. You know, I mean, 50 meters is a really long grappling hook, but it would make for a fun interaction because then that means that you could hook onto something really far away and pull yourself towards that object. So it just kind of depends on how you want to approach it. I think in Halo, they make it 20. So if that makes any sense. So we can basically just set it to 20. We'll make it Halo length, give or take. And then we can come in here and we can just say, if $, make sure that this is on our camera. It looks like it is. So $, camera 3D, grapple raycast dot is colliding, colon, var, get our collider. So once we get our thing colliding, we need to pull back that collider. So we need to pull back what object it's colliding. So $, grapple raycast dot get collider, like that. If our collider is in our group, grapple able, I guess would probably be a good one. Then we basically can go after them. So basically we're saying if we collide with an object and then we get that collider, if that collider is in the group grappleable, then we know that we're good. We have our object. So then we can basically just get our collision point and set that to the object that we're grappled to. Now we will want to make a global value for that. So we'll say var grapple position. We'll make that equal to colon vector 3, like that. And we'll make that equal to vector 3, and we'll make that 0, 0, 0, like that. We'll scroll down here and we'll just basically say grapple position is equal to $ grapple raycast dot get collision point, and that's going to fire back our collision point. So wherever we hit, it's going to say that's where our point is located. And then we should be good to continue with the rest of our code. So what I'm thinking is, after we've made that grapple hook, what is our next thing? Well, first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if input dot is action pressed grapple colon, and then we'll basically just come in here and say direction is equal to grapple position minus $ camera 3D dot global position dot normalized, like that. Else, if we are no longer pressing that button, right, if we're no longer grappling, then we could just say else grapple position is equal to a vector 3, 0, 0, 0, and then we can go ahead and just return our direction. And in theory, that should hopefully just work. So what does all this do? Well, basically, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, if you press down this action, right, if you hit the grapple button, we're going to raycast out, we're going to collide, we're going to pull back that collider, we're going to verify that it is in our group, and then it's going to set our grapple position as our collision point. And then if we hold our grapple button, then we can set our direction equal to our grapple position. So where our grapple is hit minus our global position normalized. So it basically comes back with a proper direction, if that makes sense. Else, we basically just say, hey, our grapple position is 0. Let's go ahead and just return our direction. We obviously aren't grappling at this point. And that's basically how it all works. So in theory, this should just work. So if we come here, let's go ahead and duplicate our static body. Let's make it a little bit smaller, a little bit taller, like so. Providing that it wants to. I don't think it really wants to do it that way, so let's do this instead. Let's grab our static body, let's move it up like this, and then let's just rotate it. I think that'll be easier. So we'll rotate it something about 90 degrees-ish. There we go. We'll drag this guy up somewhere about here. Let's throw it into a group called Grappleable. I think that's how we set it. Let's check our player real quick to make sure that we're happy with that. It should be called Grappleable. Let's go click on that object here. Make sure that that's correct. Grappleable. There we go. And then in theory, if I refresh this and I hit Q while looking at this, well, it unfortunately does nothing. So that's not a good sign, but my guess is it might be something that I'm doing wrong. So let's come in here, do this, refresh, hit Q. All right, it's trying to collide. It's getting the collider back, checking for grappleable. It's setting that grapple position. Checking to see if the action is still pressed. It is, and it's setting our global position. And I think I know what's going on. So it's returning our direction, but you can see here that our Y direction is not getting set. Our Y velocity is not getting set. So that means that we need to actually set that value. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we'll do is we'll basically just say if we are grappling, so if our grapple position does not vector 3, 0, 0, 0, then we can go ahead and set this. And we'll set our Y velocity to our direction. And that should, in theory, work. So we should be able to hit play. And nothing. Once again, we put a breakpoint here. Let's see if that makes a difference. So if I'm going to throw a breakpoint there, and I hit Q, and that's because I'm dumb. So I'm not returning my direction. So that also does not help. So we'll set direction equal to handle grapple. Let's try that. There we go. So that should work. There we go. So you can see now we are headed that direction. Oh, now I fell off the world. But it at least is working, sort of. So you'll see, our momentum is not being conserved, so we can let go and our character immediately falls. So we probably want to change that. We want to make it so that we don't immediately fall, that our momentum gets conserved. So let's go ahead and do that, right? Because you don't want your character to basically just immediately have 0 velocity, right? Because that's not great. So what we'll do is we'll say else speed is equal to 0, right? Because we don't want to give them any speed. And we want to move them towards that velocity of 0. And since we want to kind of conserve the momentum, what we can do is come in here and say, and is on floor, like that. And then we can basically come in here and say, else if is on floor, right? We can say if we are not on the floor, then we will conserve our energy. So basically we can take all of this and basically duplicate it like so, else we're going to move towards 0. So now in theory, well, it doesn't seem to work just yet, but that's okay. So let's see what we're doing here. So if we are if we are on floor and we have a direction, then do our thing. Else, we are going to be moving our direction multiplied by speed, X, Y, Z. We'll do the Y as well, which is fine. Direction is getting set right here, which is our transform basis. We may want to make this a global variable. So we'll grab this guy and bring it up here. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to keep what our previous direction was. And since we are making this a global value, we can't just reset it here. We need to say if is on floor like that, then our direction gets changed. And in theory, hopefully that will fix it. And we'll need to set our direction equal to a vector 3. 0, 0, 0, so we can get rid of that null value. And there we go. So now we are conserving our energy. So you can see that we can actually kind of throw ourselves up, if that makes sense. So if I were to duplicate this object here, let's grab our object. Let me rotate this, duplicate this, pull it over here, rotate it like this. So that way, when I fall off, because I will probably be falling off a lot, it'll give me something to look at and grab onto. And then I will duplicate this object one more time, bring it over here, and then duplicate it one more time so that I got somewhere to get back to, because right now I'm obviously not having a good time. So we'll just kind of rotate this around so that it just kind of works. There we go. And that'll give me enough spots that I can grapple. So I should be able to grapple onto this guy, but for some reason, pulling me away. Let's see. Wonder if there's something up with this guy. Is it the angle? Oh, I can't reach it. Okay, so that's out of my grapple reach. So that makes sense. So you can see now we can grapple. And the nice thing is that now we can actually shoot as well while we grapple. So I can come in and shoot while I'm grappling, which is really cool. Now, 20 might be a little bit too little. And you'll also notice that we're almost like we're on ice skates right here. So there must be something going on with my direction being conserved too much while I'm on the ground. So let's take a look at that real quick. Let's take a look at our player. So my guesstimate is our direction is here. And I guess our direction's probably not getting reset when we hit the floor. So what we can do is just basically, when we hit the floor, reset our direction. Oh, maybe it's because, am I dumb? I think it's because I did my speed at 0. Let's try that. There we go. That fixes it. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. Awesome. Cool. So now we have sprinting, we have grappling, we have the ability to jump and to shoot, which is great. So now at this point, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can create the ability to shoot and kill enemies, right? So we have the ability to shoot, but when we hit our enemy, how do we actually report damage? How do we actually say that this person was hit? So thankfully, that's going to be relatively easy. First things first, we're going to have to kind of start building out our multiplayer code a tiny bit, right? We're going to have to basically keep track of if we're controlled or not, because we could duplicate our player, right? We could just grab it, duplicate it, bring them over here like this, right? But if we control S and we hit play, what's going to happen is it's going to pick one of us, and then we will control both people. And we don't want that, right? We don't want the ability to control two people. We want to just control our guy. So what we need to do is we need to actually have a variable up here that basically just allows us to control that. So export var controlled, and we'll make that into a Boolean. And then we'll basically just say, if controlled, then do all of this. Same thing here. If controlled, then do all of this. And we also need to set our camera equal to our instance of our player. So we need to say, if controlled, then $camera 3D dot And I believe it is, if we take a look at our camera, current. So current is equal to true. There we go. So now we can hit play and it won't affect our player. But it also does not allow me to control either one of them, right? Well, that's because I need to select my player, hit controlled, and then when I start my game, I am the one that is being controlled. The other one is not. Simple enough. So at this point, all we have to do is set up our killing code, and we actually have a small game at this point. So for us to be able to kill our player, we first need to give our player health. So let's come in here and say var health, and we'll make that into a float, and we're going to make that equal to 100 right offhand. You can make it whatever value you want, but in my case, I'm just going to go with 100. You know, we could probably export it as well. That way it has some kind of adjustability within our editor. Now, when our player gets shot or when they get hit, we need to actually have a way to handle that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very basic function called take damage. I'm going to come down here to the bottom. I'm going to call it take damage, and I'm going to pass in a value. So I'm going to say damage amount. I'm going to make that into a float, and then I'm going to pass in the player that shot it. I'm going to pass in whether or not they hit the head of the player. Now, we'll get to that section in a second. I'm going to default that to false. Now, the nice thing about defaulting values is that you can basically, if you default a value, then if you don't pass it in, it's going to stay false. And that's very useful, especially when you're trying to create functions that are flexible. So first things first, if it's a head damage, I'm just going to say health minus equals damage amount multiplied by 2, or maybe 1.5. I think 1.5 is probably a better value there. Else, I'm going to go ahead and subtract that from their health. So I'm going to say health minus equals damage amount. Now we got to check to see if that damage was enough to kill our player. And if it was, then we have to kill our player off. So we have to say if health is less than or equal to 0, then let's go ahead and die. We'll pass in our player. Now, the reason why I'm doing a player pass in is because I want to keep track of who killed who. So that way for leaderboards, we can actually keep track of that. So I'm going to come in here and say funk die like that. I'm going to pass in the player that killed them. So when a player dies, we need to be able to basically kill the player off and then respawn them. Now, the player itself is not going to handle respawning. That's going to be handled by something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a signal that basically fires off when a player dies. So I'm going to say signal player death. And we'll put a bracket here like this, so parentheses, and then we're going to say the player that killed them. And then we'll just come down here and say, okay, if we've died, who killed us, right? Now that I think about it, I also think we need to pass in our player that, let's do this instead. So we'll say player comma killer. That way we can do both, because I'm thinking that when we do player death, we can pass in ourself and the player that killed us. And I think that that's going to be a better functionality than what I was originally thinking. So we're going to go with emit, and we're going to emit that. So that way it emits out this signal saying, hey, we have died. And that way, when we do our respawn, we can we can see which player is dead, we can respawn them, and we can give the player the points that they deserve for killing that person. We can also keep track of their death as well. We should also probably set a Boolean of whether or not the player is dead. That way, we can't kill a player that's already dead. So we should probably come in here and create a variable. So let me come up here, say var player is dead. And that way we can also check if not player is dead, then do this. And then we can say player is dead is equal to true. That way, when a player is dead, we know. And then we can come up here and handle the control of a player. So we can say if the player is controlled and they are not player is dead, And we could do the same thing up here for this section here as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to say, hey, if a player is dead, we do not want them to be able to control their player. We don't want them to be able to run around or anything like that. Now, once we have that, we should be able to also create a function to respawn our player. So let's bring that in, respawn player. And that's basically just going to allow us to reset that player. It's going to respawn them. It's going to set them to a location. It's going to reset their info. So first things first, player is dead is equal to false. And then their health is now 100. Or whatever their default value was that we set it to. Because in my opinion, this is going to make it nice and simple. Now, something that we're going to have to look at is resetting all of our guns, but we can burn that bridge when we get there. We'll figure that part out. But right now, I think that's going to be the simplest way to get all of this to work. So now we have the ability to take damage. We have the ability to die. We have the ability to respawn our player, at least allegedly. We probably should pass in a vector 2. So let's just put spawn position. We could pass in our vector 3 right there. And then we'll just say global position is equal to spawn position, like that. That way we're just resetting everything, and that way it's all good to go. And if we want to, we could also pass in a rotation as well. That way we can just set our rotation as well. Like that. And that'll basically set our respawn as well. Now, obviously, I'm coding this a little bit further than what we need for right now, but the goal is to make this nice and scalable. So this should work pretty well for us. So now, in theory, all we have to do is get our bullet to do damage to our player, and we should be good to go. So let's go to our bullet right here. And let's go ahead and hook up our collision shape. Let's go to our area 2D, our area 3D here. Let's go into area entered and let's change it to body enter. Let's select our bullet and say on body enter. And what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if that body is in the group player. So if body.is in group quote player. And then if so, we can go ahead and print that we hit player. And then we can say body dot take damage. And we can pass in the values that we're looking for. So if we look at our player, we're looking for damage amount, player, and whether or not we hit the head. Now, of course, we aren't hitting the head. We're hitting just the player. So that's okay. So the first one is damage amount. So how much damage are we doing? Well, we should probably make an exported variable for that. So we'll change this to damage amount like that. And then we're going to set this to something simple, like maybe 20, right? So it takes 5 shots to kill a player, at least with this specific bullet. I think that's a valid amount. Maybe if we want more or less, we of course can do that. And then we can come down here and just pass in damage amount. Now we have to pass in the player that shot this bullet, but we don't really know. So let's create a variable called player who shot. And we're going to go ahead and set this when the player gets shot, when the player shoots this bullet. So we'll come down here, comma, player who shot as well. And then all we have to do is come in here and say func set up bullet, like that. We can pass in a player, and then we can set our player who shot equal to our player, like that. And now all we have to do is basically when we shoot, we set up our bullet. So let's go to our pistol, or I guess in our case, it's our gun. And then we can come in here and just set up our bullet. So when we spawn our bullet, go bullet dot set up, and I believe it was capital set up bullet, like that. We could pass in a player. Unfortunately, we don't have access to our player. So our gun needs to know the player that shot. So we'll say var player, and under ready, we'll go ahead and pull back our player. Now, we can do this one of multiple ways, and I'm debating and thinking about how we can process this information. So what I'm thinking is we could either get our parent, I think it's 2 times. So if we look at our player, we can come in here, get player, get player, get player, get parent, get parent, get parent. And that should pull back the correct parent, but I don't like that idea. So I'm wondering if we should just do a setup gun function here and see if that solves our problem. So let me do that real quick. So we'll say func setup gun. We'll pass in a player, and then we'll just set our player equal to our player like that. And that way the gun gets set up properly. And then when we shoot, we can pass in our player when we set up our bullet like that. And then that means we got to set up our gun. So let's go to our gun holder and go ahead and set up our guns. Now, what I'm thinking is when we do this and we append it, we can just say gun child.setup gun. And let me make sure that I spell this correctly. Setup gun like that. And then we'll pass in our player. Now, we don't actually keep track of our player, so we can just come in here and say get parent, and that should be our player. That's our camera. And then we can do .get parent for our player. So I could probably just grab these guys and drop it into our get weapon. Get parent is probably not great if our system's going to be moving at all, but I don't think it's going to. I think we'll be okay. So we should be fine. And now, in theory, if we go into our bullet, we can throw a breakpoint on body enter and then go into our node 3D, hit play. And if everything's been done correctly, we can shoot. It has entered a body. It's checking to see if it's in the group player. It is not. So we'll hit play again. It's hit another body. We'll check. It's not. We'll actually just put a breakpoint here instead. And it's not hitting our player correctly. So is our player in a group called player? It is not. So that's going to cause a problem. So let's add it to a group called player, and let's grab our player 2, do the same thing. And then let me go into the player base class and just do the same thing. So we'll do that. So our base scene actually has player as well. And then we'll refresh and try this one more time. So we're going to click. We have to fix this gun issue, but we'll click and we've hit our player. So perfect. So we've hit player. Player is going to take damage. We'll step into that. It's not going to be head. It's going to damage the player. You'll see it's damaged them 20 damage. And there we go. And they did not die. Now, one thing that we should do is A, I should get rid of that breakpoint so I can do testing. But B, I think my bullet might be too small or the collision is not consistent. So we might have to look at that. If we look at our player, when our player dies, let's just go ahead and say print player has died. Now let's refresh it. Let's see what happens. So if we click, you can see there's a lot of inconsistency in hitting our player. So I don't know what it's hitting, but it's not hitting the player properly. Must be going through the player. But you can see the player has died. So our hit detection might be going too fast, or it might be that the area is not moving correctly or something like that. So let me try making the bullet just a bit bigger and see if that's helping any. We might need to change up how our bullet is set up. Let's try that and see if that gives us a little bit better results. It's still not great, but it's not bad. So I'm going to have to figure out why this isn't working the way I want it to. My guesstimate is maybe this needs to be so that way it has more time to move on a physics process. Maybe that's what's causing it. So we'll see how that goes. That's a lot better. There we go. That's more consistent. You can see every single time it hits the player. So it looks like because we were moving it on process, it was going through our player before it had time to calculate that it hit. So that's going to allow us to have that consistency. So great. Awesome. So now we just need to handle when a player dies, we need to allow them to despawn and respawn. Now we got to get our actual respawning code working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a level manager or a scene manager to kind of handle that. So I'm going to change this node to be called a scene manager. That way I actually have some kind of name to go with it. So first things first, I'm going to right click, attach a script, and I'm going to call it scene manager. And the reason why I'm creating a scene manager is because scene managers, they're useful for keeping track of scores. They're useful for keeping track of scene events. They're useful for keeping track of all sorts of stuff. And of course, if you'd rather have this held as more of like a game manager piece, you can always throw it in the game manager, and that's totally fine. But in my case, I'm going to actually create a scene manager. So first things first, we're going to need to keep track of which players we have that we need to respawn. So we'll say var players to respawn. We're going to make that equal to an empty array. And then we're going to also have a variety of spawn points. So we'll say spawn points, and we'll make that empty equal to an empty array. I'm going to also have a respawn timer, and I'm going to set that to 3. I believe that's what Halo uses as well. Now, I actually should not have deleted my ready, so I'm going to go ahead and add in my func ready because I need that. And on ready, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and get all of my players. Okay. So first things first, we'll say var count, and we're going to make that equal to 0. And then I'm going to say for child in get tree dot get nodes in group, and we're going to make that of type player. And I'm going to basically get all of the players that are currently in my scene. Now, this code is just for debugging purposes. It's not actually going to be useful for later, but for right now, we'll go ahead and do it like this. So I'm going to say name. I'm going to make that the child.name. For right now, I'll have an ID parameter, and we're going to make that count. We're going to have the kills that the player has. We're going to make that default to 0. We'll do the same thing for deaths and score. And then we're going to have if they have a team. So we'll have deaths, score, just in case we have capture the flag or something like that, and then team. And for team, I'm just going to make it equal to an empty string for right now. Now, of course, this is more for scoreboard and leaderboard purposes, but I'm going to have that. That way we have this all set up properly. Now I'm going to have my child.respawn. I believe we called it respawn or player has died or something like that. Player is player death, it looks like. So we'll do player death. Go back to our scene manager here, and we'll connect that to a player has died function. So we'll say func. We'll pass in the player and the killing player. And inside of our connect, we'll type player has died. Like that. And it looks like our stuff here isn't working. So let's take a look at it real quick. Child name, comma, ID, count. That's fine. I'm missing my equals. We need an equals right there, or else that's not going to work. So there we go. That should solve that. Player has died. So we're going to connect that. And then I'm going to go into my game manager, and I'm going to create a variable called players. And I'm going to make that into a type array. And then I'm going to go back to my scene manager, and I'm going to say game manager.players.append. We're going to append our current player. Now, of course, this isn't completely necessary for when we get our multiplayer all built in. But right now, since we don't have a multiplayer, we don't have our game manager all set up properly for multiplayer just yet. So this is more of just a temporary stopgap solution. So now we'll just do count is equal to count plus 1. And then we're going to need to get a hold of spawn points. So let's take a step back for a second. First things first, what exactly are we doing? Well, what we're doing is we're looping through all of our players, and we're adding them to our game manager. And we're also connecting their death signal to a player has died function, which I'm going to add a pass to just so it doesn't get mad at me. Now, what this means is basically we're setting up our scene manager to know which players are where and how many there are. We're setting up their IDs. We're getting them ready and good to go. Now, technically speaking, this might want to get done over in the game manager, but then this would have to loop through the game manager, and it's just difficult to deal with. So we might have to change this later, but that's basically all this is doing, is it's just running through, looping through, grabbing our count, setting up an ID, setting up the players with kills and deaths for our leaderboards, and it's just hooking up our player has died signal here. And that's basically the gist of it. And then we're going to need to have some way to respawn our player. So I'm actually hooking up and basically to respawn our player, we need to have some kind of spawn point. So I'm going to come in here and I'm actually going to add in some marker 3Ds for that. So I'm going to right click add in a child node. I'm going to add in a marker 3D and I'm going to call this a spawn point like that. And then I'm going to put it in a group called spawn. And then I'm going to come over here and I'll put a spawn point here and I'll control duplicate and put one right here. That way we have stuff for testing. And then if I go back to my script here, I could just say spawn points is equal to get tree dot get nodes in group spawn point. Now, this is probably going to need to change when we get teams and team-based games going. So if we have red versus blue or whatever you want to have, we probably will need to assign points to specific people and say that this is a blue team's point, team spawn point, or a green or a red or whatever it happens to be. Now, when a player dies, how do we actually handle respawning them? Well, that's actually relatively simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say players to respawn dot append, and I'm going to pass in the player that died like that. And then I'm going to pass in their respawn timer, right? Because we don't want them to respawn immediately. And we'll pass in respawn timer. Now, this is basically just going to append it and get it going. Now, we do also need to notify the game manager of that kill, and we'll get to that in a minute. But for right now, this will be how we work. And then we basically need to handle a timer, right? We need to be able to handle if our players are respawning or not, and we need to handle that respawn. So I'm going to handle that through a process. So we'll say func underscore process delta. And since it's running every single tick, we're basically just going to go in and say, okay, do we have things we need to respawn? If so, let's go ahead and respawn them. So we'll say var items to remove bracket bracket is equal to bracket bracket. So we're making an array. And then we're saying var current index is equal to -1 for I in players to respawn like that. We're going to increment our index. And then we're going to say I dot respawn timer minus equals delta. And then we're going to check if that I dot respawn timer is less than or equal to 0. And then if it is, then we're good to respawn. And I also spelled respawn wrong right there. And this is mad because this index right here. So that's fine. So once our respawn timer is reached 0, we can actually respawn. So we're going to grab back a random respawn. So we'll say var spawn is equal to spawn points bracket bracket rand I %, spawn points dot size like that. And that's going to pull back a actual spawn point. And I'll run through this code so you guys know exactly how this all works in a second. And I spelled current wrong, so that's why this is mad. So we'll do that. There we go. That fixes that. And then we'll basically say I dot, and I believe our player has a reset player. Where is it? Respawn player right here, which is our spawn position and our spawn rotation. So we'll go back to our scene manager, I dot respawn player, and we'll pass in our item spawn dot global position, comma, spawn dot rotation underscore degrees. And I could probably type this as a marker 3D, and that will probably help a little bit with getting this. There we go. I just want to make sure that that's spelled correctly because I always make that mistake. And then we need to basically append it to our items to remove array here. So we're going to append that, and we will append our current index, and we should be good to go. And now all we have to do is remove it from that array of respawn players. So for I in items to remove players to respawn dot remove at I. And that'll basically just lift out that item in the array. So let's take a step back. How does all this work? Right? So first things first, we're creating an items to remove and a current index. And basically the reason why we're doing that is because we need to know what the index is of our array that we want to remove. Okay. And that's for this code down here. And then that's what this items to remove is basically just which items do we want to lift out of our array after we've done our spawn. And then we loop through our players, we increment our index, we reduce their spawn timer, right? Because their spawn timer is 3 seconds. So basically it's saying, hey, after 3 seconds have passed, if they're at 0, go ahead and spawn them and respawn their player information and then append that they've been respawned. So therefore they can get removed from the array for the respawn player, if that makes sense. And that's basically how this works. So what we do is we literally come in, we say, get our player to respawn. We lower their time. So reduce time to spawn by 1. Is player able to spawn, or is respawn time 0? Yes, respawn player. No, then go ahead and go to next player. And then when all of this is completed, so you'll see that this goes here, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here, because it's going to the next player to respawn that player if that player is ready to be respawned. And then once this is all completed, so it's going to go up like this. And then once it's completed, we have another segment of code that basically just says remove all players that's been spawned. And that's basically how this works. I know that this isn't quite UML, but it's close enough to explain how it works. But that's basically how this operates. It's relatively simple. And once we have this, we should be hopefully good to go to be able to test it. So let's go ahead and hit play. And let's shoot this player. So 1, shoot. The player has died. We'll put a breakpoint here. Oh, and the player respawned. So it actually worked. So you can see here that we're coming in, we're looping through. 5 seconds has gone by. There's respawning. We're hitting play. And I think they spawned in the exact same spot. There's only 2 spots that they can spawn, so it's a 50-50 shot. So I actually think they spawned in the same spot. So let's reload. The player is dead. Well, I think it's working, but I think that we have a very, very poor luck because this should just work. If we add in an additional spawn point, let's see if that makes a difference. So let's duplicate. Let's add 1 more here and 1 more here. And then let's see if that works. So we'll refresh. I'll shoot the player. They spawn over there. I'll shoot the player again. And they spawn right there. And you can see that's basically how we can do our spawn code. Awesome. So now you'll notice that we can hit the player even if the player isn't dead. So we should probably check to see if player is dead before we can hit the player. And we should also despawn our bullet when we hit our player. So if we head back to our bullet real quick, let's take a look at that. You can see that if our time to live is less than 0, we queue free. Well, when we hit a body, we should probably queue free as well. So let's queue free that guy, get rid of it. And then what we'll do is we'll get rid of this guy here. And we'll actually come in here and go into our take damage. Because if our player is dead, they shouldn't take damage. So if player is dead, then return. That way it doesn't really do anything. So the player is dead, doesn't do anything. In that way, we're not hitting the player and doing 0 damage to them and then running this death code for no reason. It doesn't really help anything, if that makes sense. So now let's go ahead and fix our shooting issue. So if we hit play and we just click, you'll notice that we can't shoot on startup, right? So the reason why that is because if we take a look at our gun here and we come down to our shoot, we hit a breakpoint, we click, you'll notice that active is false. If we come down here, you'll see that active right here is false. So for some reason, Godot is just making this false, even though by default, we actually have it set to true inside of our player. I feel like there's something weird going on. So what we'll do is we'll come into our gun holder and on startup, we'll just say weapons, bracket, weapon index dot active. And we'll set that to true. That way it just by default gets set to true. And then hopefully that should just work. And it does not. So why is it broken? It's actually shooting. It's not spawning the bullet, which is interesting. So I wonder, is the bullet colliding with the gun? Is that what's going on? So that's strange, but it's now shooting. So my guesstimate is the bullet is now colliding with the gun. Let's see. Yes. My guess is probably correct. It is colliding with our gun. So we need to fix that as well. For some reason, we weren't running into this issue, but now we suddenly are. So let's go ahead and fix that while we're here. So let's go into our guns real quick. And let's change the collision of our player and of our guns. So I'm going to keep our players on layer 1. I'm going to move our gun collision onto layer 2. So we'll come down here, collision layer 2. That way it doesn't get caught in any of our collision layers. It just kind of doesn't hit anything. And in theory, that should fix it. So if we go back to 3D, we hit play. And there we go. So that should work now. There we go. So now everything seems to be working, although our gun is not quite straight. So let's take a look as to why it's not shooting quite where we would expect. If I take a look at our bullet, global transform basis Z. So basically local. I probably need to do minus gravity. Maybe that's what's going on, is the gravity is a little funky. So let's see if that fixes our issue. That about fixes our problem, although our bullet now falls really fast. So let's make it so that gravity affects it a lot less than what we expected. So instead of position Y minus gravity times delta, let's reduce our gravity to something a lot lower than that. And right now, gravity is a named variable. So we'll come in here and say var gravity, and we'll make that equal to something like, let's make our gravity something like 0.5 or so. And then that should change it to be a bit better. If we change that, that should help a lot. Because I think gravity is quite, yeah, see, there we go. That's a lot closer to what we expect. So that should work. And our spawn code is working. And now let's go ahead and build out the ability to pick up ammunition and the ability to pick up guns, because those are the two really big features that you're going to need, right? Your players can run out of ammunition, right? And they're going to want to be able to pick up different weaponry. So that means we're going to have to do some cleanup code on our actual gun itself. So when we want to do a ammo pickup, I'm going to do kind of like a Quake style pickup where you just kind of run over a thing and it gives you ammunition. So how we can pull that off is we can go into our scene, new scene, and we're going to create a 3D scene. Now, how we're going to build this out is going to be relatively simple. I'm going to name this ammo refiller. I'm going to right click, add in a child node, and I'm going to add in a mesh instance 3D. I'm going to come into my inspector and make that into a small box mesh. And I'm going to scale that guy down to be nice and small, something like this, something nice and simple. And then I'm going to go ahead and right click, add in a child node. Let's add in a second mesh instance 3D. Let's make that into a, let's go with another box. I think a box will probably be good. We'll make it nice and small. That's probably too small. So let's expand its size just a little bit. Let's scale this down and pull it up, something like this. A lot of times these games have floating weaponry or floating ammunition and floating health, things like that. So we're going to basically do that. So we'll have this guy here. And what we'll do is we'll right click, add another child node. Let's add in an area 3D. Let's right click that, add in another child node, and let's add in a collision shape 3D. And then let's click on this guy, create a box shape, and then let's make this just a touch smaller so it kind of fits within the bounds of our object here. There we go. And then I'm going to right click, add a child node, and we're going to add in an animation player, not an animation tree. So we'll right click, add a child node, animation player. We're going to add in a new animation. We're going to call it idle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very basic idle animation. And how it's going to work is basically I'm going to grab my mesh instance 3D, which thinking about it now, we might want to make it a node 3D. So we'll add in a node 3D. And I'll explain why in a moment, but I'll drag this guy up here like this. I'm going to put that mesh underneath that node, and we'll just call it object container. And what I'm going to do is grab that animation. I'm going to click on my object container. I'm going to create a breakpoint keyframe here, and I'm going to create another keyframe here as well. Now, these keyframes are not quite in the right location for what I'm trying to do. So let's drag it back to the front so that way it's in a nice, good spot. Now at point 2, I'm going to go ahead and drag this guy down, and I'm going to click on my object container. I'm going to put another keyframe and another keyframe, and you'll see that this goes down. Now that's probably way too fast. So we'll bring this all the way down, and we'll bring that to be a ping pong. So what that's going to do is it's going to do this. Nice and simple. See that? And that might be a little bit too quick. So let's make this 2 seconds long, actually. Let's bring this all the way back down to 2 seconds. So it's nice and slow. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this rotation. We pause this real quick. We'll go here, and I'm going to make this guy here rotate around 360 degrees. So 360. I'll throw a nice keyframe right here as well. So now it's going to go down and back. And that might be a bit too much for what I'm trying to do. So what if I come in here, change this to something like 180 instead? Does that feel slightly better? We go back to the beginning. I think that works for what we're trying to do. And that's basically going to give us a little bit of that juicy feedback that we're looking for. And now if we right click our ammo refiller and attach a script, let's go ahead and call it the ammo refiller.gd like so. And I'm going to go ahead and stop that animation because there's no reason to play it if we don't need to. And what we'll do inside of our code here is on ready, we're going to go ahead and hit $play idle. And that's just going to tell the game to play it at all time. Now you'll notice that of course we have our ammo refiller and our ammo refiller. So I'm going to right click my assets, create a new folder, call it ammo refiller like that. And I'm going to come in here, grab both of these guys, drag them up here and drop them in. So now they're in a nice little organized space. Because again, keeping this organized is always important. And now I don't need to worry about my process. All I'm worried about is when our player runs over this, right, they're going to pick up some ammunition. So that means when the area detects a body, right, on body enter, go ahead and allow us to pick up some ammunition. So if body dot is in group quote player, then we can go ahead and give them ammunition. So body dot, and if we take a look at our player code real quick, you can see we have no way to get a hold of the weapon that they shoot, right? See this? So if you remember, calling back to the previous portion of our tutorial, we came in and made it so that when we changed our weapon, change weapons returned a weapon, if you remember. So that means that we need to create a var current weapon and just say current weapon is equal to that. And then we also need to make sure on startup, we say current weapon is equal to our gun holder like this dot weapons bracket 0, because we know that on startup, we're going to have our weapons be equivalent to 0, right? It's going to have that 0 index. So we should be good right there. I'm going to take a look. It's called weapons. I want to make sure that everything is correct here before so perfect. So we'll go to our ammo and we'll say dot current weapon dot ammo, I believe we had ammo pool plus equals, and now we need to determine how much ammunition we're going to give the player. So I would like to make that exposed so that way I can update it later. So we'll say at export var ammo to give equal to something like 10, let's say. And then we're going to say ammo to give. But you'll notice that if we go into our node 3D and we drop a ammo refiller into the project, so let's drop one of these guys in like so. Well, it's really small, so that's not ideal. I'm going to have to adjust that, but we'll make it a bit bigger just so that way we have a properly sized object. We hit play. We have 40 ammunition. We run through. It doesn't look like anything's really changing. So that's not a good sign. Let's take a look at our player real quick. Okay, so I think I figured out what it might be. So because our player is getting duplicated, our UI managers are getting duplicated. And I believe that that's what's causing our problem. So basically think of it like this. Our UI manager, since it's underneath our player, basically is getting duplicated twice. If you look at our scene when we have multiple people, you can see right here in the bottom right, which you kind of I can't show you with my mouse, but it looks like there's some overlay right there and right there, right above. If I hit the Windows key right here and right here, there's some overlay going on. So what I think is going on is that it's properly updating as expected, but we're just getting a duplicate. So let's go ahead and take this, Control X. Let's go into Node 3D and let's just drop it into our scene manager. Hopefully that won't break anything too bad, but let's try it. And then let's see what happens real quick. Well, it's not updating our stuff anymore, but at least I think it's going to do okay. Invalid get index ammo pool on base null, which fine. Because our current weapon is now set to null. So it looks like this got removed. If I hit Control Z, it comes back. I think it was when I was getting rid of this by accident. So now if I hit play, it's still not updating properly. So my guess is our UI manager is getting updated by somebody that's not supposed to, which leads me to believe that my player, because my player is... it's checking if it's active. I should probably set these guys to be active by off by default. That's my guess. So my guess is what's going on is that because we have two players and it's getting overlaid, one is taking over the other. So I'm going to try to see if that will work. It does not. So something's being funky here. I can run through here, but then it runs immediately after. And I think, again, that's because my players, if I take a look at, yeah, it's because, so what's going on is basically both of our players, the two players that are in our scene, are fighting for control of who is active. And that's what's going on here. So the reason why it worked sometimes and didn't work other times is because sometimes the correct player would get control and the other one wouldn't. And that's basically how it works. So what I'm going to do is come in here and say var active. And then I'm going to say if active. And I'll make that a type Boolean like that. And then in our player on ready, I'm going to say $gun holder dot active is equal to true. And it's a nature of multiplayer games that sometimes you got to counter code, or you have to completely rip out all of your player code and then have like a player and a client code base. And we might have to do that in the future, but for right now, we'll just counter code it. And I think that should fix it. So if we hit play, index 0 on base. And my guess is because this is not active, this isn't getting set, which means that we have a timing issue. And unfortunately, this is one of the big struggles with Godot. So what I'm going to do is instead of running this on ready, I'm just going to have a set up weapon holder, and I'm just going to drop this in here. I'll get rid of active. I'm not really worried about that, but I'll have a setup weapon holder like this. And then what I'll do is I'll come into my player and I'll just say current weapon holder active is true. Instead, I'll just do gun holder dot setup. And I think we called it setup weapon holder. So we'll drop that in like this. And then in theory, this should work. There we go. If we run over this, well, that doesn't quite work, but all of our gauges do once again work. So at least there's that. I know that we've spent quite a bit of time messing around with this, but that's kind of the nature of how this all works out. Okay, so I think I may have found the issue. So you can see here, we set our weapon index to 1. So if we set that to 0, because originally we set that to 1 probably about 3 hours ago when we had our other gun visible at first. So now, since we set this to 0, that should in theory work, especially since in our player, we are setting our current weapon as weapon 0. So that is basically the reasoning. At least that's what I think. So let's refresh and let's try that again. So if we shoot here, you can see 8, 7, 6, 30, and then we run into here, hit play, and now it's 40. And then if we run into here, it's 50, 60, 70. Now we don't want to allow the player to be able to just run through and pick up as much ammunition as they want, right? They have a maximum amount, right? In our case, it's 40, so they can't go above that. And we should have some way to basically limit the amount that they have. So first things first, we're going to come in here and say if body.current weapon ammo pool is less than body.current weapon dot, and I think we called it, if I remember correctly, under our gun, we had a max ammo pool right here. So we'll say if it's less than our max ammo pool, then go ahead and give the ammunition to the player. And then if our body.current ammo pool is greater than our max pool, then let's go ahead and set our body equal to our max ammo pool like this. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to say, hey, if it's over what we expect, then go ahead and just set it to that value. That way we're not going over that amount. Now, we also don't want the user to be able to just run through the ammunition and consistently and always get ammunition. You want to be able to take ammunition so then there's a little bit more of a tactical advantage. So you can run through an area, pick up the ammunition so that your enemies don't actually have access to that ammo. So how can we do that? Well, a really good way to do it is to right-click, add in a child node, and add in a timer. And we're basically going to make it so that asset only resets after a specific amount of time, which in my case is going to be set to about 10 seconds. At least that's what I'm thinking. And what we can do is if somebody runs up and takes the ammunition, we can come in here and say var ready to go like that. And we'll make that into a Boolean. And by default, I'm going to make that a true Boolean. We're going to say we're good to go. And I'm going to say, hey, if body is in group and we are ready to go, then we can go ahead and say, if all of this, once we add ammunition, ready to go is equal to false. And that's going to go ahead and basically make it so that you can only run through it once and then it gets rid of that ammunition. And then we're also going to hide our mesh instance. So let's go $object container dot hide like that. And that will hide that object. And then what we can do is we can come and actually hook up our timer right here. So we'll click on our timer node. On timeout, we'll attach that to our body entered, and we'll say ready to go is equal to true. And then we can show our object container. So $object container dot show like that. Now this is going to be flexible enough that we could put any icon up here. We could do anything that we really wanted with this. So I'm thinking that later we can abstract this to do health pickups or to do other things like that and have it so it respawns those items. Now, basically, once the user runs over their stuff, we hide the things. We need to start our timer. So hit $timer dot start. And basically, what that's going to do is as soon as we run it over, it's going to hide the object. It's going to start a timer. And then once that timer times out, it's going to allow us to reload and pick up that ammunition again. Now, if we test it, all we have to do is go up to our node 3D, hit refresh, and then we can run through it. So first things first, if we run through it and we have ammunition, you can see that it doesn't do anything. If we reload, we drop down to 30 and we run over it, you'll see it picks it up. We'll wait for 10 seconds and I can reload a few times, run through, and you'll see that it does nothing while I'm running through it. And then you'll see this spawns back in, and then we can run back over it and pick it back up, and it once again gives us ammunition. So awesome. So that's how we can basically create a item pickup, ammo pickup inside of our project here. So now the question is, how can we do weapon pickup? And weapon pickup is going to be a whole mess of things to build. So basically, when we want to do a weapon pickup, all we need to do is basically take this exact object here with our ammo refiller, but instead make it spawn a gun instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to right click my assets. I'm going to create a folder like that. I'm going to call it weapon pickup. And I'm going to basically just take these two guys. I'm just going to grab my ammo refiller.tscn and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to right click, duplicate. I'm going to call it weapon pickup. And I'm going to pull this down into my weapon pickup section right here. Now, this weapon pickup, if I double click on it and open it up, we'll go ahead and rename this to weapon pickup like that. And I really should rename our ammo pickup so that it actually has a proper name, because ammo space pickup is kind of painful. But for right now, we'll deal with it. And we're going to right click, detach our script, right click, attach our script, and we'll call it weapon pickup.gd. And that's going to throw it right here. Now, with a weapon pickup.gd, it's basically the exact same thing that we have here, except for instead of having an area 3D, we are not going to have anything. So that means that we're not going to have that signal either, but we are going to have our timer. So let's go ahead and disconnect that and then reconnect it to our weapon pickup. So it creates that little function. And what we can do is underneath our object container, we can basically just add a gun. So right now we don't have any guns, but what we can do is we can actually create them, right? So we can come into our player, grab these two guys. So grab the first one, drag it down into our guns and call it pistol.tscn. And then do the same thing for our assault rifle. Drag that guy in, call it assault rifle.tscn. And it should have put it in the correct spot, but now it's gone. So put it way down here. So I'm going to drag this into guns. Hopefully that doesn't brick out our assault rifle, but we'll see real quick. So if I hit Control S, you'll see we get an alert, which means that this is not working. So we'll delete our assault rifle and we'll re-drag it in. That way it understands the reference, because if you move stuff around, sometimes Godot gets confused. So it's always good just to reset some things to make sure it works correctly. Now, once we have this in our weapon pickup, we can basically come in and tell it to spawn whatever weapon we want it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit export var weapon to spawn. I'm going to make that into a packed scene like that. And that's going to create a weapon to spawn. So then I could just drag my pistol into there and there we go. So then on ready, what we can do is just spawn that item. So we can say weapon to spawn dot instance like that. And we can go $ object container dot add child weapon spawn dot instance like that. And that'll basically add that object as a child. And then we could basically just set this to a var current weapon is equal to this. And then we can basically just say if we want to do any additional edits or anything like that. So what I would do to check this out is delete this mesh instance, come over here to this object. and drag a pistol into it and see what it looks like. So you can see how large this pistol is. So first things first, we're going to need to make it smaller so it matches our style. And then we're going to need to rotate it up 90 degrees because you don't want your gun to be rotated in a weird way. So we're going to rotate it so that it's proper. And if we want, we could do this and then offset it by a specific amount as well. But we're going to have to be cautious about positions. So I think it would be best to do it this way. It's just going to be a bit simpler to work with. Now for our scale, 0.42. So we can just go with 0.2 across the board. I think that's going to be fair. And then we need to rotate it by 90. So if we go into our script, we can just go current weapon dot. Since this is a node 3D, you can do that dot scale is equal to a vector 3, and we're going to pass in a 0.2 comma 0.2 comma 0.2 like that. And that'll basically set its scale properly. And then we can do rotation degrees on that current weapon. And we'll make that equal to a vector 3, and we'll pass in a 90 comma 0 comma 0. And that'll basically just set that up, hopefully correctly. And then all we have to do is just start our animation. So $ animation player dot play idle. And that should just work. Now, something that we're going to have to look at is basically stealing a lot of our previous code within our holder code. So let's go into our ammo refiller. You can see that we have a on function timeout ready to go, true object container dot show. So what we'll do is we'll basically just steal that idea. So we'll come in here, go into our weapon pickup, add in a ready to go. And when it comes to our actual process here, what we can do is we could just check if $object container dot get child count is less than or equal to 0, then we can go ahead and say if we are ready to go, then we can go ahead and start our timer. Like that. And then we can set ready to go equal to false. And then when that timer times out, all we have to do is just instantiate our stuff. So ready to go is equal to true. And then we could basically just steal this little bit of code right here, plop it down like that. And we're going to need to add our child. So $object container dot add child, that's add gizmo, to our current weapon. So basically we're just taking our current weapon, throwing it underneath our object container like that. And I'll do the same thing up here. So that way it on ready, it's good to go. And that's going to make this all very flexible. So we can always change this from our actual level. That'll make it a lot better. So now if we go into our node 3D, we can come in here, drop our weapon in. So if we grab our weapon container right here, drop it in, move it around, you'll see it's a little bit on the small side. So I'm going to have to make it a little bit larger. That's a whole mess of a problem that we're going to have to figure out later, because it looks like I'm scaling up by quite a bit. But for right now, I think that that's acceptable. And for our weapon that we have here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it because it's going to instantiate one. So I'm not really worried about that just yet. Now, if we hit play, in theory, there's our weapon. Now, obviously, we can't do anything with it. We can't pick it up or anything like that. That means that we're going to need to actually create some kind of way to pick up and drop weapons. So let's build that part out. Thankfully, this is all quite simple. Now, we may want to offset these guys because you can see they're both going up and down at the same time, and you may want to adjust that. So you could adjust the timing as you see fit. But to do this part, to actually pick up the weapon, let's jump right into that. To do interactions is going to be quite simple. Basically, all we're going to do is we're going to go into our pistol here. I'm going to click on this guy. I'm going to go into the node and into the groups, and I'm going to add in an interactable group to it. And then that's going to allow us to basically hit this guy. So we're going to raycast out, hit him, and then basically say, okay, if we've hit this object, then we know that we can interact with that object, if that makes sense. So what we'll do is we'll head over to our player. We're going to right click, add a child node. We're going to click on our grapple raycast. We're going to duplicate it and then change it to interact raycast. We'll come to our inspector here, and I'm going to make this -3 meters, I think. So that's going to give us about this distance, give or take. And I'm going to move it to the 7 collision mask. And the reason why is because then I can put my pistol on the 7 layer as well, which means it's pickable, it's grabbable. And to me, that's going to make it a lot simpler for us to be able to work with. Now, once we have this, we should be able to go into our player and we should be able to code some stuff. So I'm going to come in here and say func interact. And I'm basically going to say if var raycast is equal to $interact raycast. And then I'm going to say if raycast dot is underscore colliding, much like we did before with our grappling hook, right? If we're colliding with something, then we can grab that collider. So var collider is equal to raycast dot get underscore collider, like that. And then we can check if collider dot is underscore in underscore group, like that, interactable. Then we know that it's an interactable object. So we know it's going to have a method that's going to allow us to interact. So we'll say if collider dot has underscore method interact, then we can go ahead and fire off that method. So collider dot interact. Now, this is a good way to create a very simple system that should work and be relatively scalable, right? So we know that basically if it has an interact method, we know that we can interact with it. And if it's in the group interactable, then we can guarantee you that it at least should be interacted with. Now, from here, what we can do is we can go to our gun. So we can go to gun and we can add in a method called interact. Like that. Now, when the player interacts with a gun, they need to be able to pick that object up. So I'm debating either passing in the player for interact, so that way we know who's interacted with what. And I think that's probably a good idea. We'll pass in the player. And then what I'm going to do is type player dot pick up gun. And I'm going to pass in self, like that. And that'll basically give us that interaction that we're looking for and reference our player. And the reason why this is nice is because in the future, if we have something like a door handle or a flag or something like that, we can keep track of who has access or who has touched that object last or things like that. So it can really open up our interaction than just, hey, I'm going to pick up this object. So now if we head back to our player, we can pass in self here to say that we are interacting with that item. And then we can have func pick up gun. And this is going to be relatively easy. What this is going to do is basically when the player wants to pick up a gun, all we have to do is basically just say current weapon is equal to $weapon gun holder dot pick up weapon. Now we're going to need to pass back the weapon that we're going to be picking up. So we'll go ahead and put in weapon like that, and we'll go weapon. Now we'll want to make sure that our gun actually passes that in, which it does. So that's good. So we can basically just catch that little event right there and then pick up that weapon. Now, if you want to use signals, that's definitely an option. You could subscribe to that signal and then basically pick up the weapon from there. But typically I find this is going to be a little bit easier for us to do. So now if we head over to our weapon holder, so our little gun holder here, and we create a function called pick up weapon helper, and we'll pass in the weapon that we're picking up. What we can do is we can first queue free that item. So item.queueFree, and that's going to delete that previous item. And then we can come in and say var new item of type node 3D is equal to item.duplicate, like that. Now, if we want to pass in true, we could, and that's going to remove all references and make a full deep copy of an object. But in our case, I think we can get away without that. And then we can just add a child of our new item. And that's basically just going to add that child. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to freeze that item. These guys are rigid bodies, so we want to make sure that we freeze that item. So new item dot freeze. And then we can basically freeze that item, right? Because these guys are rigid bodies. Now, when you freeze an item, we're going to actually create a function for that. And I know what you're thinking. Well, why would you have a function for freezing? Well, that's because since these guys are rigid bodies, we want to get rid of their collision when they're in players' hands. We don't want them to have that collision because that can cause a lot of problems. So what we'll do is we'll go into our gun and we'll create a function for freezing items. So we'll say freeze should freeze, and then if should freeze, then go ahead and say $. I believe it's collision shape 3D, correct? Right here. So we'll pass that in. Collision shape 3D dot disabled is equal to true. Else, we know it's false. So therefore, this exact same interaction. And then freeze, although, you could come in and clean this up a tiny bit, because if should freeze, if it's true, then the disabled is going to be true, right? And then if not, it will be false. So technically speaking, we could just pass this in like this, and that will actually solve the problem just as well. And then if we go back to where our pickup is happening, so that is in our weapon holder. So if we head back to our player script, click on our gun holder, come back to our pickup, and I know I'm bouncing around a little bit and I'm sorry, but what we can do is say new item dot, and we can basically set its rotation degrees equal to a vector 2, well, vector 3 in this case, 0, 0, 0. And then we can set its position. So new item dot position is equal to a vector 3, 0, 0, 0. And that's basically just going to throw the object underneath our gun holder here, and it's going to zero it all out. So that way everything's kind of settled here. And then I'm going to let the new item dot get node, and I'm going to tell it to grab the animation player. And I'm just going to tell it to play the shooting animation. And that's basically just going to give it a little bit of fun, right? So when you pick up the gun, you kind of shoot it real quick. It's not going to actually do anything, but it just makes it look kind of fancy. And then I'm going to go with weapons, get weapons, like that. Now, something else that we should look at is with our gun, we should probably add in a parameter of if it's a picked up weapon or not. Typically, it's not super useful, but it can be nice if we want to keep track of whether or not a gun has been picked up. So let's come up here and just say var at export var picked up, like that, and we'll make that type Boolean like that. And then if we come back to our weapon holder, gun holder right here, we scroll back down, we can just type new item dot picked up is equal to true. That way we just know that that item is currently picked up and currently is being held by that player, because there may or may not be a case where something might be broken or something might be weird. So we just want to make sure that we clear the air, pick up the item, and that we have it. And this helper is basically going to allow us to pick up a weapon, right? So what that means is we need to actually create the function to pick up a weapon. I know that I built the helper beforehand, but basically the whole purpose of the helper was because when you pick up a weapon, the vast majority of the code that's here is going to get used in two spots. So we'll add in a function called pickup weapon, like that, and we'll pass in an item, like that. We'll say if weapons dot size is less than or equal to 1, then we'll go ahead and type pickup weapon helper. We'll pass in our item, and then we'll just return change weapons, like that. However, if we actually have two weapons, we don't want to have any more than just two weapons. So we'll need to drop our weapon. So we'll type drop weapon, and we'll create that function in a second. Then we'll pick up our weapon and we'll pass in our item, and then we'll return our change weapons. Now, technically speaking, if we wanted to, we could further optimize this code a little bit by basically taking this little bit, dropping this like this, and then dropping this like this. And then in theory, we could say if weapon size is greater than or equal to 1, and that technically would work. And I think that's going to be a little bit more efficient now that I'm looking at it. So we'll do that. And then we'll build out our drop weapons like that. Now, with dropping weapons, what we need to do is we need to remove that weapon from our child. We need to basically throw it, unfreeze it, and then drop it into the world. So thankfully, that's going to be relatively easy. It's a lot of code, but it's not too bad. So what we'll do first is we'll remove our child, which is going to be that weapon. So we'll remove that weapon. So weapons, bracket, bracket, weapon index, like that. And I believe it's weapon index. It's capital W. So that got me. So there you go. Capital W, weapon index. Then weapons, bracket, bracket. And I'm probably just going to copy this guy because it's going to be used quite a bit in this little bit of code. So weapon index dot picked up is equal to false. Then we're going to queue free. And then we're going to go ahead and say var new instance dot duplicate. And basically what this is going to do is going to do exactly like what we did before. We're literally doing the same thing, but the opposite. So we're going to remove our object, say it's not picked up, and then we're going to duplicate it, spawn it into the world, and then basically give it a slight impulse. So we'll say get tree dot get root dot add child new instance. And then we're going to go ahead and say new instance dot freeze, pass in false, and then we'll go ahead and set our transforms and our rotations. So we'll say new instance dot global transform dot origin is equal to global transform dot origin, like that. And then we'll basically go new instance dot global underscore transform dot basis is equal to global transform dot basis. And what this is going to do is it's going to set our location and our rotation. This is basically the other way to set it. So you could do global position and global position and global rotation and global rotation degrees and rotation degrees. But in my case, I wanted to show you guys a different way to go about it. Then we'll type new instance dot apply underscore impulse. We'll say get parent dot global position dot z multiplied by -6. I'm going to say in my testing, -6 seems to work pretty well. And then we'll say weapons is equal to get weapons, like that, just in case they drop the weapon without us calling interact, right? So we want to make sure that we have the ability to get weapons, because what if I just hit the drop weapon button, right? I want to be able to have that capability. So then we'll come in and say if weapons dot size is less than 1, then go ahead and return null. Else weapon index is equal to 0. Weapons dot bracket bracket weapon index dot show. And then we're going to return our weapon index. So we'll just grab this guy, copy it, and paste. And I'm going to make that into a function. So basically how this all works, and I know that I'm kind of walking through this in kind of a fast fashion. So let's take a step back. So when the player hits interact, which we haven't even defined yet, but when the player hits interact, what it's going to do is it's going to raycast out and say, hey, I want to pick up this item, right? So it's going to shoot out a raycast. It's going to hit that item. It's going to come back and it's going to say, hey, I want to pick you up, right? So it hits this guy and says, hey, I want to pick you up. This guy comes in and basically grabs this interact function, right here. And since this is a gun, I know that when we interact with it, that means we want to pick it up, right? You can't really do much else with guns when they're laying out in the world anyway, right? So it's basically just pick up or drop. So when you hit interact, it's going to tell the player to pick up that gun. So we're going to go over to our player and we're going to go to our gun holder and we're going to tell our gun holder to pick up that specific weapon. And then our gun holder, if I go to where that is, when we run pick up weapon, we're going to check to see if we have more than one weapon. And if we have more than one weapon, we want to drop our other weapon, which means we're going to run through, remove it from our weapon index. We're going to drop it out of our inventory. We're going to throw it and get rid of it. And then we're going to spawn it into the world and then drop it. And then we're going to return null if it's less than one. So that means if we have no weapons, then we're just going to return null, say, hey, look, we don't have any weapons on our character anymore, right? Else, we're going to set our weapon index to 0. We're going to show our weapon, and then we're going to return that weapon index because we want to make sure that when we drop our weapon, that our weapon goes to weapon 0 index, right? So that way it's like switching your weapon, if that makes sense. Because when you drop a weapon, you need to pull another one out. So if you have the assault rifle, you drop it, it's going to show right here. And then we're going to come in and then pick up our weapon. And basically picking up a weapon works exactly the same way, but the opposite. We're going to queue free that item that lives out in 3D space. We're going to bring it into our place. We're going to add it as a child. We're going to freeze it so it no longer can interact with anything. And then we're going to set its rotation to 0. And we're going to play a little fancy shoot animation just to make it, feel nice. And then we're going to set it as picked up, and we're going to get that weapons and reflow our array, if that makes sense. Because that's what get weapon does, is it basically reflows our array and makes sure that our array is correct. So that's kind of how this all works, if that makes sense. And now we can head back to our player and you can see our current weapon, and that should work. So now all we have to do is come up to our process function right here and basically have an if input dot is action just press, and we will hit quote interact, and then we'll hit colon and we'll say, I believe we called it pick up weapon or interact, like that. There we go. And then I'm going to come in here, copy this guy, go up to project settings, and I'm going to paste in that interaction, and I'm going to hit add. I'm going to click on my plus, hit E, okay, close, and hopefully if we did everything correctly, which we probably didn't, everything will work. I'm going to double check my interact raycast. It is on 7, so that is correct. If I click on my pistol, it is also on 7. If I click on my assault rifle, it is on not 7. So there's that. And we're going to want to make sure that our environment, so these static bodies, are on the proper collision layer, which in this case, they are not. So we're going to add it to layer, I believe our pistol is layer 2. So we'll add these guys to layer 2 to make sure that they can interact with the level. So we'll just kind of do that real quick, and then we'll hit play. So if we're lucky, we can run up here, hit E, and it crashed. Invalid type function, apply impulse in base rigid body. Cannot convert argument 1. So let's try changing this to global transform.basis and see if that makes a difference. I don't know if it's going to, but it might return something different. I don't think it's going to, but let's try it and see. So we'll go ahead and refresh this, attempt it one more time. So we'll run up here, hit E. Okay, so it says Stack Overflow. So we are picking up our weapon. Because I didn't do pick up weapon helper. So we'll change this to pick up weapon helper. We'll control S. Let's refresh that. Run up here, E. And well, we picked up a weapon. We did pick up the gun. This guy did not do anything. This weapon did respawn, so that's cool. So if I hit E, you'll see that it did pick up the weapon correctly, but these guys are not doing the rigid body effect. So that means that we did something wrong, but our code is working. So at least there's that. Now, the scale on our guns are wrong. So let's go ahead and reset our scale as well when we pick up our weapon. So I'm going to come in here and do .scale, and we're going to set that to a vector of, I believe it was 1, 1, and 1, just to set everything back to default. Now, when it comes to the weapons not getting rigid body. My guesstimate is it has to do with something with freezing. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if we click on our gun and we check out our freeze, if I pass in true, this is going to disable the collision and then it's going to freeze the object. If I pass in false, it's going to unfreeze the object. So that should, let me see. We go to our gun holder, drop weapon, new instance, freeze false. So that's correct. Because I'm pretty sure if I take a look at my assault rifle, freeze is on by default. So it should work, I think, but it's not. So that means there's something weird going on here. The object does have collision, so the collision is on. So you can see how it's not going through the object. So if I take a look at this pistol that's floating in space right now, and I take a look at it, you can see that it is being frozen. If I uncheck that, it now falls to the ground. So for some reason, our freeze is not working the way that we expected it to. So I think it's because I'm going to have to do not freeze, and let's try that. So we'll refresh this. We'll hit E, and there we go. There's our gun. It has fallen to the ground, and our gun has also disappeared, which is not a great sign. So I think it has to do with my sizing. So let me take a look at my pistol real quick. I'm going to go to transform. Scale is 1, so that's correct. But for some reason, if I go to my remote and I go to my scene manager, I go to the player, go to his camera, go to gun, I click on my pistol. Let's take a look. It's falling, so that means that it is not being frozen is my guess. Let's take a look. It is not. So that's my problem. You can see right here, freeze is not on. So that means that when we pick up the item, we're doing it incorrectly. So let's take a look at our gun. You can see we do freeze is equal to not freeze. So that's totally fine, because if it should freeze, then freeze needs to be off, I think. Freeze is such a hard one for me to understand. So if should freeze is true, disabled should be true. So then freeze should be equal to freeze, right? Because we're saying, oh, freeze is equal to should freeze. Oh, I'm dumb. Okay, there we go. So let's try that. Oh my goodness. So now if I hit E, there we go. The gun is in its correct location, and we now have a gun picked up. Now let's just really quick set up how to drop our gun. So let's say we don't want this gun anymore for some reason. We go into project settings. We come in here and type drop weapon. We're going to go ahead and make that into a G. So we'll hit G, hit OK, hit close, and then we'll come into our player and just say if input.is action just pressed, and we'll say drop weapon, colon. When we want to drop a weapon, that's going to be really easy, right? We already have all the code set up, so it's actually just super quick. That's the reason why I'm bringing this one in. So we'll come down to the bottom and we'll just have a func drop weapon like that. And then we'll just say colon current weapon is equal to $ camera gun holder dot drop weapon like that. And then we can basically just go up here and type drop weapon like that in our player. Then we can go into our gun holder, and we already have the functionality to drop weapon. So that means if we hit refresh and we hit G, we throw our weapon on the ground. We can also pick it up and throw our, oh, well, it looks like we might have a slight bug. That's not a good sign. So if we drop our weapon and we attempt to pick up a second one, even if we don't have 2 weapons, you can see that we can't actually pick up 2 weapons. So that means that there's a bug in our pickup code. So let's take a look at that real quick. So if we go to weapon pickup, or I guess it would be under our gun holder code, when we determine whether or not we want to pick up a gun, if our weapon side is greater than 1, then go ahead and drop weapon. And that should fix it. So let's try that. So if we hit G and then we pick it up, there we go. Now we have our 2 weapons. And if we pick up our 3rd weapon, so if I hit E, you'll see that, well, that didn't quite work. So for some reason, if we refresh this, hit E, if weapon size is greater than 1, so our weapon's size is 2, so it should be greater than 1, but it says it's not, which doesn't make any sense because we have 2. If it is greater than 1, that's why, because it's less than 1, so that's my fault. So that means that this should now work. Sometimes I wonder if I'm at all intelligent with programming. There we go. So at this point, we have a very basic game. We can pick up ammunition, we can shoot our player, we could do a lot of stuff. We can pick up weapons, we can grapple and kind of fly around the room and stuff like that. So we have a lot of really cool interactions to make a nice small game. Hey guys, Editor Mitch here. So I'm going to continue this tutorial a tiny bit further just because after editing it down, it ended up around 3.5 hours or so. And I feel like I didn't fully cover the character controller as much as I would like. So I think it's good for me to add in the ability for us to be able to aim our gun. And I think it would be good for us to be able to dash. So let's first bring in the ability to dash because that's going to be super quick and easy to do. So dashing, all we have to do is basically check for the dash button. And then if so, then go ahead and do our dash. Now, thankfully, all we have to do is come down here just before our move and slide and override everything, right? Because once we are dashing, we know that we're pretty much just going to override everything and go from there. At least I'm thinking, because I don't really care if I have any of this. So what we'll do is we'll say if input.is action just pressed, quote, dash, then we'll come in here. We'll go ahead and set up like a dash timer. So basically how this is going to operate is player's going to hit the dash button, right? We're going to set some values here. So we'll come in and we'll basically say, okay, dash timer equal to a dash duration, right? And then we'll come in and we'll also remove some of our sprint amount. So sprint amount gets minused by dash cost. So that way you can't dash and sprint and then have it continuously affect. That way your dash and your sprint are kind of combined. Do you want to run quickly over a period of time, or do you want to cover a lot of distance quickly but not be able to sprint afterwards? At least that's kind of my thought. And of course, if you guys don't want that, you can remove that. And then we'll come in and we'll say, and then we'll have a separate lane over here that basically just says if dash timer is greater than 0, then we'll go ahead and set our velocity equal to our dash velocity. And then we'll subtract our dash timer. And then we'll continue to move and slide like normal, like that. And that's kind of how I think we're going to approach it. And technically, this could lead into this. And then if dash timer is 0, we'll just do our regular move and slide like so. And that's kind of how I think we can approach this. So if we head back here, what we'll do is first we need to subtract our sprint time. So sprint time minus equals, and we have to come up with a dash cost. So it's up to us on what our dash cost is, but I think I'm going to go with something like 3. So we'll come up here and we'll say const dash cost, and we'll make that equal to 3. So it's going to cost 3, I guess, sprint time for our stuff. So you can see we have a sprint time of 5. So if you dash with a full sprint bar, then it will only cost probably about half of your dash bar, give or take. And then I'm also going to come in and grab a dash duration and dash velocity. So I'll duplicate jump velocity and we'll call this dash velocity. And I'm going to change this to be something better than our sprint velocity. So our sprint speed is 8. So let's make our dash velocity something like 40, something crazy. So you're moving really fast in one direction. And then we'll also do our dash duration as well. And our dash duration is going to be something like 0.10. So it's going to be a very, very short duration. So you're going to cover that speed in a very short time. Of course, if you want to increase this time, play around with it, see what you want it to be. But in my case, this is how I'm going to do it. Now, if we head down here, let's set up a little bit of that code. So sprint time minus equals dash cost. And then we're going to need to get a value that's global called dash time. And the reason why is because when you're dashing, you need to keep track of how much time you have left for when you're dashing. And dash time is going to be of a type float, and it's going to be equal to 0. And now we'll head back down here. We will go to where our dash code is, which is right here. Dash time is equal to dash duration, like that. And then we'll just come in here and say, if dash time is greater than 0, then let's go ahead and do all of the rest of our stuff. So we'll say velocity dot x is equal to direction dot x multiplied by dash velocity. We'll duplicate that and we'll change this to our z direction, like that. And then we'll need to subtract our dash time. So dash time minus equals delta. And so now, as long as this is working correctly, we should be good. So we can come up to our project settings. We'll type dash, enter. We'll come down here, plus icon. Let's make it C for right now, although I guess C would be crouch. So maybe we should make it F. It just depends. So I'll do F for right now. We'll hit close. We'll come into Node 3D, hit play, and let's see if this works. So we'll jump F, and you can see me dash. There we go. So that's going to give us a lot of really cool interactions. So we can now grapple, dash, and then grapple. See? So that's going to give us a lot of fun. There we go. That's going to really work because it gives you kind of like a nice additional movement capability. Now the question is, okay, how do we make aiming? Aiming is actually really easy. If we take a look at our player script where we added our dash here, all we have to do is basically just come up a little bit. I would say probably here. And we'll say if input dot is action just pressed, quote, aim, like that, then we can just aim. And of course, we don't have a function called aim, so let's go add that. So we'll come down here and we'll say func aim, like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to tell my gun holder to aim. So we'll hit $, gun holder.aim. And then I'm also going to go ahead and set up zooming, right? So when you aim, your character kind of zooms in on that gun, right? They're focusing in. So what we'll do to do that is we'll type $camera 3D dot FOV, and we'll make that equal to something like 80. Now, we also should come up with some kind of Boolean on whether or not we're aiming. So let's head up here. Let's create a Boolean. So var aim, and we're going to make that into a bool, like that. By default, we'll keep that off, and we'll come down here to where our aim code is, and we'll set our aim Boolean equal to not our aim Boolean. So we'll say aiming is equal to not aiming, I believe. Although it says I already have a function aim. I see. So I called it aim versus aiming. So let's go up here and change this to aiming instead, and that will solve this problem. So when we set our FOV, we're going to want to set our FOV to our aiming FOV if we are aiming. But if not, we're going to want to set it back to our original FOV. So if we head up to our ready, let's just set up a variable up here called camera startup FOV. We'll make that into an integer, and we'll come down here and type camera startup FOV is equal to $camera 3D.FOV. And that's just going to set up our FOV and get us to have a startup FOV. Now, if we come down here, we need to check if we are aiming, right? And if we are aiming, then make our FOV be equal to our startup FOV. So we'll copy this guy here, paste, camera startup FOV, else we'll go ahead and do this FOV. Now we could do this and this is going to work, but this is a perfect case for a ternary operator. So a ternary operator is what's considered like an inline if statement. So if you come in here and hit camera FOV is equal to start up FOV if aiming, else 80. And that is the exact same thing that we did here, but in a single line. So let's do that. And then we need to actually set up our aim code under our gun holder. So let's head to our gun holder real quick and let's create a function called aim. Now with our gun holder, when we want to aim, we can pass in a parameter called aiming. And much like before, if we are aiming, then we can basically aim our weapon. Okay, we can play an animation. So when you aim your gun, what you're doing is you're taking your gun, right? If you look at your camera perspective, you take your gun and you're effectively moving it over, right? And then up into your view, right? Like that. So all we have to do is right click our gun holder, add an a child node. Let's add in an animation player and let's create a new animation called aim. Like that. And then all we have to do is grab our gun holder, create a position, create, and then bring it over like so to the center of the screen. So I believe that's going to be 0. And then let's bring it up to where it's a good aiming position, something like that. We're going to put another point like that. And you'll see that our player will bring that gun up. Now, of course, we're going to want to make it a little bit slower than that. So that's probably too slow. So we'll bring this back a tiny bit. That's closer. Now we're going to also want to give it a little bit of flavoring, right? A little bit of umami, a little bit of juicy feedback. Let's pull this guy down, put a breakpoint there, and then you'll see that that's going to give us a little bit of a smoother feel to it. Now, if we come over, I believe it's to here. If we click on this little guy, we can zoom in here and take a look at this object here. Hopefully, Godot will let me. Let me see if I can get it to do what I want it to do. I don't think it's going to let me. So let me try this. Hold on 1 second. So let's come in here. Let's delete this animation. And then let's add in a new animation called aim again. And then I'm going to click on my gun holder, put a breakpoint, use Bezier curve, create. See if that's going to give me a little bit better feedback. Because right now, Godot is being difficult. So let's hope that this works. So I'm going to bring this guy over, something like this. So to 0. And then I'm going to lift it up like that and put another point right there. Or not. You can see we bring it up. And I'm going to bring this guy over a little bit, give it a little bit additional space. And I'm going to attempt to do what I did before it got all upset with me. So let's drag the Y position. So if we come here, we hit D, that's going to bring the gun over like that. So they kind of draw it up. A lot of times when people draw a firearm, they bring it over and then up to their vision instead of just dragging it in. Now, something that we have to look at is I wish I could make this a tiny bit smoother, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Unless I maybe pull this guy out a tiny bit. Just to kind of help. There we go. That'll make it a little bit smoother. There we go. And then I'll draw this guy back to about here-ish. There we go. And that's a pretty good aim animation. And then for us to be able to actually aim our gun, we can just come into our gun holder and hit $animation player dot play aim. So if we are aiming, we're going to play the aim animation. Else, we're going to play the aim animation, but this time we're going to play it backwards. Like that. And then if we go back here, we can go to our code where we do our player aim, and we can pass in our aiming. Like that. Now, something I'm thinking about is if we should flip these. If I should put this guy above, because right now, if what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a false variable when we do our first aim. So it'll be false saying that we want to go to true. And then I'm checking here. So I think this logic inside of aim is backwards in my gun holder. So let me go take a look at that. So let's go with if not aiming, and let's try that. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our player script, scroll up. Let's take a look at our aim. If action just pressed aim, then aim. So go to project settings. Let's add that aim. I believe I did a capital A. Yep. So aim. Then we'll come down here, right click on our input, hit OK, close, and then go into our node 3D. Let's right click. And there we go. Now our FOV seems a little wrong. So we're going to have to take a look at that. But so far, that's not too bad. That works pretty well. And if we switch our weapon, it does the same. See? So I think that's pretty smooth. It feels pretty good. Something that we have to look at is what is our camera FOV by default? I mean, I typically like a pretty high FOV as it is. So we're at 75. So if we wanted to, we could change this to 90, which is what I like. Or we could go ahead and set our FOV to be slightly different. So you can see here, this is a slight zoom, so it feels a little bit better. And at this point, we have a pretty decent aiming system. But if your character is sprinting, you probably don't want them to be able to aim while they're sprinting, right? Because that's kind of weird. A lot of times games make it so that you can't aim while you're sprinting. So what we can do is we can basically, if we are aiming, then let's go ahead and reset that aiming. So we'll come in here and just say aim, and that hopefully will reset us. So if we hit play, we can aim, hit shift, and it'll pull out our aim. See? So that should work. So if we right click aim, we hit shift, it'll come out of our aim like that. Now, the only thing that I don't like is if we are sprinting and we hit the right click, our character basically cannot kind of snaps in between the states. You can see that they kind of bounce. So we're going to have to figure that part out. So what I'm thinking is the best way that we're going to do that is we can come in here into our aim and just check if we're sprinting. That way we kind of do a double check here. So what I'll do is I believe we have a handle sprint, and there's a section in there where we have a sprint speed right here. So I'll just check to see if our speed is equal to our sprint speed. And if so, then we know that we can't aim. So if our sprint speed is equal to this, so if it's not equal to that, then we can aim. And that way it kind of forces them to unsprint if they want to aim. So now in theory, if we're sprinting and I right click, nothing happens. And I think that works pretty well. Yeah, that works pretty good. Awesome. So at this point, I think we're good to go. So I'm going to jump back to the previous section where I was signing off. And yeah, thanks for watching. Now at this point, we are, I think, probably around 5 hours into this tutorial. So I'm going to push pause and I'm going to continue this in a second video where we're going to add in dashing. We're going to add in leaderboards. We're going to add in a settings menu, remappable controls, things like that. And then I would love to add in a fully multiplayer system with Elo. So that's all on the horizon. But at this point, we're about 5 hours in. So I'm going to leave it here for today. And the next video should be out hopefully relatively soon. I'm hoping by the new year, I'll have the next video out. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, you know, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button because I am here to make content for you guys. This video was a viewer suggested kind of series. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below or jump on my GitHub. Link is in the description and leave a suggestion in my suggestion slot. I'm always up for new content. It's something that I always like to create. I like to find new ideas and new things. So let me know. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below or jump on my Discord. A link is in the description for that. And anybody there will be more than happy to help you out. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching. And I will see you all next time. Thanks.